Hello and welcome to And the Runner-Up Is. This week on the show, we're talking the 1961 Best Actress race at the Academy Awards, where Sophia Loren won for her performance in Two Women. But why did she beat fellow nominees Audrey Hepburn, Laurie, Geraldine Page, and Natalie Wood? We'll explore all this and more today on And the Runner-Up Is. Hello and welcome back to And the Runner-Up Is. I'm your host, Kevin Jacobson, here to talk about the 34th year of Best Actress at the Oscars, which covered the films of 1961. We'll be discussing why Sophia Loren won and why the losers lost, and who we think was the runner-up of this Best Actress race. And my guest today has been on this show a few times before on episodes of On Second Thought about Sense and Sensibility and The Emigrants. But believe it or not, this is his first time on the main show, contributor to The Film Experience and host of the great One Inch Barrier podcast. Welcome back, Juan Carlos Ojano.
Hi, Kevin. I was supposed to greet you in Italian, but I forgot the word. I think it was ciao, but yeah.
Buongiorno.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much. I really do appreciate this. And I really am very excited to be talking about a rather groundbreaking year in Best Actress with you. That is very fitting with the show that you did so well. But before we talk 1961, let's talk about Best Actress as a category.
Oh my God.
My first question for you, of course, what is your favorite Best Actress win of all time?
All right, so I've thought about this question since you started this Best Actress series. And I haven't seen everything, which is weird and kind of would take away my gate card. But I think my personal favorite is Meryl Streep in Sophie's Choice. She's my favorite actress of all time. And for her to win in perhaps one of, if not the peak of her acting prowess is like, it's not always happening at the Oscars. Yeah. So that was great. And I think when I marathoned her Oscar-nominated performances, I intentionally watched this last. And I thought, this is considered one of the greatest performances of all time. Mm-hmm. Have the pressure. And she just lived up. But, something also like Jodie Foster in The Silence of the Lambs, because that film is just one of my favorites ever. And that's not a typical performance nor film to win at the Oscars. More recently, I fell in love with Judy Holliday in Born Yesterday. What? I just loved her. And I was surprised on how, I don't know why it's not a more, maybe it's a more popular win now, but speaking of also favorites, I think I would just also mention some of in my era since I started watching the Oscars, because I started in 2009. And these are for personal reasons. Like, for example, I know everyone's thinking of Meryl Streep in The Iron Lady, but to see my favorite actress of all time win in my lifetime and to see it happen, I was in tears, and I was, I think, in high school. And Frances McDormand in Nomadland, because that's such an atypical win.
Yep.
And Olivia Colman in The Favorite, because she did not expect it, and I did not. I think we all did not. Yeah. Ooh. But yeah, those are some of my favorite stuff. But this is my favorite category. Ever. I'm sorry, international feature film, but ever.
Wow. Dissing your own show.
Oh no, they work hand in hand.
That's true. That's true. Yeah, especially this year. Well, those are some very excellent choices there. You gave me a wide selection from early Oscars to one of the most recent. So, yeah, hard to argue with that. I'm surprised Meryl Streep in Sophie's Choice hasn't come up more when I ask this question of people, because you're one of the first, if not the first, to say that after 34 episodes.
To be honest. I
Yeah,
question.
maybe it's just too obvious of a pick, quote
Yeah,
unquote.
and she's overrated, but
Exactly. Well, excellent. Well, my other question, of course, what would you say is your most heartbreaking loss in Best Actress?
okay, I try to think of heartbreaking, and nothing really comes up in terms of like what really like brought me down because I think generally Best Actress has been good. There are just even performances that I don't love. I still appreciate women in general. But for example, I think something like Olivia de Havilland in The Snake Pit not winning. I think that's a performance that really pushes the boundaries of. I think it's almost like a prelude to method acting, and
Yeah,
to win
totally.
over Jane Wyman, which was fine. Um, Whoopi Goldberg in Color Purple, such a fantastic debut. But at the same time, it's also, when I think of heartbreaking losses, sometimes I understand when they lose. This is weird, but sometimes it's more heartbreaking when they lost to also something that's great, because you cannot even like question the winners. Like, so I also have like, I said Jodie Holiday. I will say also Gloria Swanson. That happens in a year where the winner is great, but oh no. And
Right.
Jane Fonda in They Shoot Horses, Don't They?
Great
But
pick.
again, like Maggie Smith.
Maggie Smith, right.
But in my lifetime, I would say like the women of 2009. I love all four.
Yeah.
And even as a baby Oscar fan, to see The Blind Side take off that season was a downer.
Yeah. Yeah.
My film criticism things are not sharp yet, but I knew that there's something wrong going on.
Yeah.
And
Something's off,
yeah,
right?
and speaking of Olivia Colman, I speak of like the duality of years. Like one of my heartbreakers is Glenn Close and Dwarf, because that's the first time I've seen the Oscars live for a while, and I was so confident, and she was wearing gold, and
She was wearing gold.
and I remember having a literal headache because I thought, I'm so happy for Olivia, but what the F happened?
You and me both, my friend. You know that.
Yeah.
Those are some really excellent choices once again. Yeah. Was there one from 2009 that you feel like most of all deserved it of the four? Because I've seen people say Carey Mulligan, some
Yeah.
people say Gabrielle Sidibe, some people say Meryl Streep and Julia.
Yeah. Personally, it's Meryl, but I
Yeah.
could not question anyone choosing Carrie and Gabourey, even Helen, just over Sandra.
Even Helen.
I love Sandra, but not in that film.
Yeah. Sorry, Sandra. You're getting beaten up a lot in this heartbreaking loss section, but
Love her.
Love her in general.
Yeah.
Not a fan of that win. Not many people are, unfortunately. So, all right, excellent. Let's get into this year at the Oscars, the 34th Academy Awards. The nominees were Audrey Hepburn for Breakfast at Tiffany's, Piper Laurie for The Hustler, Sophia Loren for Two Women, Geraldine Page for Summer and Smoke, and Natalie Wood for Splendor in the Grass, with the winner being Miss Sophia Loren. So, Carlos, before we break down these performances on an individual level, did you have any thoughts just from watching these over the past few days or so?
I think this is a group that I respect. I don't consider any of them to be bad, like I said.
Yeah.
And I also think, number one, it shows different acting styles, which is reflective of the shift that is happening in the culture at the time. Culture in terms of like, what's going outside of cinema, which is like the sexual revolution and the anti-establishment, the rise of that. But at the same time, shift in the acting styles. 50s, 50s had the entrance of the method actors, Marlon Brando, Montgomery Clift. Well, one of them, Geraldine Page, and
Totally.
Marilyn Monroe mid-career, which, yeah, I've also seen her work here with the Misfits this year. And also the shift in terms of post-war cinema, where imports became more common, and there was really an audience for films from all over the world to start having an audience in US and other places, of course. It was really a time of cultural exchange, and it is reflective in the nominations throughout this decade, where you just regularly see, unlike now where you have to almost like champion one international feature film for one category. Now you're getting like this year you had like 3 international feature films in original screenplay. Like, it really says something about the openness to embrace other films from other countries, but also probably maybe it's also hinting the way especially actresses are kind of underserved in terms of like juicy parts. In terms of the performances, I think all of the actresses here, wow, I'm really like judging them. I really think they understood their characters. The question now for me is whether their strategies in performing said characters worked for me or not. But all in all, I respect this group, and
yes,
my feelings.
I respect it too. It's interesting, actually, watching this again. I talked about this on the 1960 episode, which you haven't heard, but there is this sort of emerging theme in this category at this time where so many performances here in this lineup have to do with women having to deal with terrible men or just like being tormented by men in some way. And it's wild to see that. I think, obviously, I don't have a problem with those types of stories being told. But as a pattern, I think it's a little troubling maybe to look at a lineup like this from the 60s versus a lineup from the 40s, like where we have something like Greer Garson playing like a scientist, or Joan Crawford as like a mother having to deal with her terrible daughter, or like all the great Bette Davis diva types of performances just like totally commanding the screen. And now it feels like with this lineup, it sort of is narrowed down to women suffering due to men, and almost always having to do with like a romance of some kind. And I think some of that is just that we're still coming off of the 50s, and you know, the sort of social unrest of the 60s hasn't quite sort of climaxed yet, I guess. So it's still a little bit same feeling. But yeah, individually, I'm a fan of all these actresses. Some of the performances I definitely like more than others. This is not exactly a perfect lineup for me, I don't think. But, you know, obviously the big story of the year is Sophia Loren winning and how unique that was at the time. And I'm excited that you're here with me to help break down exactly why that was.
Yeah, I just want to say that a lot of these performances or characters deal with sex or like sexual abuse, sexual relations, sexual work, sexual repression again, and I don't know. It's a theme, and it's starting to feel like this is my year, and at the same time, I forgot what I was supposed to say. I forgot. Let's just jump in. Yeah, I'm sorry. I forgot the other one. Oh, gosh. Yeah, here we go. I'm messy.
Yes. Well, looking forward to more mess as we talk about these performances. Let's just jump right in, starting with a very iconic one here. Audrey Hepburn in Breakfast at Tiffany's. I would say Audrey Hepburn here in her most iconic role at this point, if only for the imagery, you know, of her in her little black dress, the cigarette holder, the sort of updo. It's taken on a life of its own, I would say, where even people who haven't seen Breakfast at Tiffany's or maybe haven't even heard of it probably know that image, and that's how they know Audrey Hepburn. But Breakfast at Tiffany's is based on a very famous story by Truman Capote, who apparently wanted Marilyn Monroe for this role, which would have been a very different vibe, I would say. Yeah. Possibly still good, but just different. But Audrey Hepburn here is really just thriving at this point in her career. She's, you know, hot off an Oscar nomination 2 years prior for The Nun Story. She's also in another film this year, The Children's Hour, which is excellent, and she's excellent in. So she's having a moment. And in Breakfast at Tiffany's, she plays Holly Golightly, a young woman living in New York City who works as an escort of sorts, but not exactly like a sex worker. It's kind of vaguely defined in the film exactly what she does. Sort of like a cafe society girl who accompanies men, you could say. There's money exchanged. Either way, she's the life of the party wherever she goes, even though she sometimes finds herself with a rough crowd. So one day she meets her new neighbor, Paul, and they strike up a friendship, which very gradually becomes a relationship. And Paul finds out more about her, including the fact that she ran away from home and that Holly isn't even her real name. And it's mostly just sort of about Holly sort of adjusting to these new situations and just figuring out who she wants to be with, what she wants her life to be, all that good stuff. So let's talk Audrey Hepburn. I'm very curious about your relationship with Miss Audrey Hepburn, especially with this being her most iconic role, maybe a lot of people's starting points with Audrey Hepburn, and yeah, just what you think of the performance behind the image.
She's annoyingly beautiful. I'm kidding. Well, with Audrey Hepburn, I always liked her presence on screen, and I think it's because there's always a natural grace that she brings to her performances. But I think I would say that I haven't seen The Nun Story, but I've seen Wait Until Dark. So I'm trying to watch more in her filmography where it would really stretch her acting skills, because I think a lot of people took her as a beauty icon, as a fashion icon, and deservedly so. However, that could also be like a box in itself. And I know for people who know her imagery without even probably having seen her films, like I know when I was in high school, someone dressed up as Holly Golightly, and I was like, do you know what she works as? but in terms of this performance, I am so glad I saw this again. I think the first time I saw this was 12 years ago. I did not understand anything about sex work or sex or the loneliness at the core of this story. I saw it as a romantic comedy with Asian representation, and but now that 2022 life has been hard for me and ups and downs, I started to see a very lonely story between two lonely people. And the film takes a romantic comedy route mostly. So Audrey's job for the most part was to make it effortless, but it's not actually easy because she has to bring, that easygoing persona, the facade of the society girl, which Audrey said was a challenge for her. But it's a mask because there are parts of her life that she doesn't have control with, or like she would rather not deal with. So that early scenes of her rat-a-tat line delivery is actually her way of trying to take some control in the situation. The way George Pepper just like watches her rat-a-tat-tat. And I love that persona, that easygoing vibe, is recontextualized within that performance. So that happy-go-lucky aura is a performance in itself, because that's her way of separating Holly from Lula May. And she has the comedic skills to make it work. She's not the butt of the joke, but I love that she's so game in bringing that comedic rhythm. And also when she works in drama, mostly in quiet moments, those are really beautiful, because you really see, even when the film tries to soft pedal the darker quarters of this film, which is a part of the problem of the film as well as a project that mutated and mutated, she gives those hints of like, this is beyond what you're looking. If you think this is just a happy girl walking around New York, it's not. There's a lot buried within this beauty of the jewelry and the costumes. It really mostly worked for me. I mean, there are parts of course, there are parts where, especially in the big outbursts, where I feel a bit of the antiquated acting in Hollywood, which is not, I would not say it's bad. It's just a different acting style. But she complements so well with George Pepper, the tone of the film. She knows how to get along with it and subvert it when needed. And the film is a star vehicle, but she gives more dramatic stakes to it. And I love that she was able to handle all of that comedy, drama, something in between, with almost flawless negotiation of tone and mood. And I don't know, I really believe she knew her. And this is a performance that is recalled in iconography But I'm glad the performance doesn't rely on that. It's much more complicated than it looks.
Yes, it very much is. And I agree that she really understands this character. I think at this point in her career, she, again, coming off the Nun story, she really tried to study as much as possible in order to prepare for a role. And you're really seeing that here, where maybe she wasn't as comfortable in the beginning taking it on, but then she just dove in head first, and you see this really complicated performance that is so well modulated. And this, just to speak to my own history with this is a very much a starting point for me with Audrey Hepburn. It is definitely how I came to sort of recognize who she was, her charm, her talent, how elegant she can be, you know, and just how she's able to inhabit a role in a very specific way that is so unlike anyone else. And really, my opinion of the performance hasn't changed since that first viewing. If anything, it's gotten deeper, my appreciation of the performance and just the layers she shows. I mean, to start with, she has the glamour, you know, the kind of posh attitude that is necessary for this character, who is very often with these like hip parties. She's with these high class people. She fits right into that sort of timeless beauty and body language. All that surface level stuff is perfect. But then, yeah, it's when you look at the character of Holly, she's a very complicated person who had a rough childhood. She ran away from home. You know, she reinvented herself really in New York. And it's like on the surface, it's like, yes, she's this sophisticated woman with great fashion. Isn't her life great? You know, but there's a lot more going on in terms of where she's been, what she's had to endure, not only in her past even, but just like her current situation, dealing with all these men around her. You know, it's a lot. It's plus there's her brother, you know, who she's worried about, who she's doing this all for to get money to help him. I think throughout the performance, she sort of peppers in those little cracks of like, you know, all the weight of everything she's been carrying, especially towards the end, which is she nails the ending, I think, to this character. And honestly, it's one of those performances where real life is maybe mirroring her character's journey, even because Audrey did experience hardship in her childhood, in her past, and she sort of reinvented herself in a way, and people assumed that she was one way, as you were kind of indicating, because of how she carried herself. But, you know, the reality is there was some darkness in her past, and growing up during World War II was not easy for her. So I think probably there's some of that just in Audrey's own life that maybe reflected itself in this performance and allows her to kind of pull it off, don't you think?
Yeah, thank you, Be Kind Rewind, for my Audrey Hepburn education.
Right.
I love what you said about her experience, because in Belgium during wartime, because definitely it starts to make sense in the way she brings that depth of emotions, and how even at the time where you could easily do that like on an outward direction, I love the progression of the character from really talkative to almost like hard to talk at the end. That starts to get empty when you take away all that noise. It's becoming empty. That lifestyle that she is striving to repackage herself, it's empty. And a person who's also lost helps her find that. I mean, you know, talk about like, oh, a man helping her, but anyway, and even in those scenes where like when she is with, I forgot that cutie George Peppard, when she is with him, when she almost falls asleep beside him, she almost turns childlike. So you see how in small gestures she draws history, and I think you don't really get to do that unless either you study trauma or you have experienced it. Hopefully we just study it, but what she brought here was something that I'm surprised, because I think my attitude towards this time in cinema is that I am prepared to face a level of artifice, and that's fine, because that's the language of Hollywood at the time in terms of the filmmaking. But I'm surprised of these touches where, ooh, that doesn't seem fake at all. Like, what I really love is, I know it's a small moment, but when she was supposed to go out with George Peppard, and that's the first time he calls her Lulame. And there is this abrupt shift in her face. It's not very showy, but her voice just lowers, and the smile is different. It's not a smile high society, it's a genuine smile. And there is this almost like shock, but in a good way, because she's now starting to look for Doc, right? Doc. Yeah.
Yep.
And I don't know, the textures that she's bringing in small units are something I did not expect. First of all, from this time. Number 2, from Hollywood from this time. Number 3, from a film like this. And knowing how sanitized this version of the story is. Like, I'm surprised how far she pushed within the sanitized confines to bring hints of brutal emotional truth. I don't think you could do that. Well, I think you could do that by studying life, either in an acting class or in life. I don't know if she's really had acting classes, but that experience at wartime is a hell of an education. Yeah. And I believe like people, especially actors who've had so much in life, get to bring so much because they could only go when they go so deep in life at the lowest. They could offer so much, and they could offer it in the exact measurements needed in the film to fit. And I saw a lot here, and I don't know. It's like, it's such a melancholic film. I don't know why people are having fun with this.
I know it is. Well, obviously, we could talk about just like the Moon River sequence of her singing out the window and sort of strumming the guitar very plaintively. I have to say that scene still gives me chills no matter how many times I watch it. Her delivery of it, which is very melancholy, and her expressions where it's clear that she wants better for her life, and how she ends the song and sees that Paul is watching her. Yeah. And she has like tears in her eyes. Her whole demeanor changes so quickly when she sees him watching her. It's a really lovely scene. And I think, I don't know if you agree with this, but she feels a level of safety, I think, with Paul that she just doesn't have with other men. And that's why when she sees him watching her, she's not like, oh God, this creep is watching me. They're like, there's some comfort there, which makes sense thematically with the character. And there's just this level of warmth and comfort that she's able to show with Paul, who, I mean, the character of Paul, I don't know if he's exactly that interesting to me compared to her, obviously. Yeah. Actually reminds me a little bit of the dynamic of Cabaret, weirdly, with like Sally Bowles and like the Brian character, where she's this like larger than life figure, and then he's more of just like this steady, calming presence. And it's sort of like an opposites attract kind of situation. I don't know. I've seen some criticism just of that aspect of it, like the George Peppard performance and character. Some people aren't a fan of. I think it works for these two characters who are sort of these lonely souls, but they express themselves differently, but they still kind of attract.
I think Holly/Lula recognizes a wounded soul subconsciously. Right. And that's why she immediately had that feeling of safety. You know, I remember now because Moon River was written for her. It's like one because my mom told like, oh, that was sung by a man, right? And she covered, no, it's the other way around. Like, men always take from women. That's ridiculous. I just like remember when I was younger and I thought, oh, okay, it fits. That fits her vocal range. But now I'm thinking, when the way she sings it is almost like breathing. And it feels like a release because she's alone. And I don't know if I'm not a writer, but when George was writing upstairs and she's singing, they're both at the time where they're starting to express themselves and they thought they were alone, but they're not. Right. So there's a solace in finding two people alone and lonely, and they recognize that, oh, we're on the same place, so that's why it's like safety in numbers. Yeah. I don't know. It just makes more sense. I don't know. I thought I already knew this film. I thought when I watched this a few days ago, Like, yeah, I'm 27 years old. I have experience in life. I now know this film, all right. But now, like, oh, there's something more. Like, even
There's much
when
more
you
there.
mentioned Moon River, the way she sang it, and the context of why she's singing it, like, oh yeah, she's bringing a lot.
She is. So speaking to sort of the backstory of Holly, where this man shows up who turns out to be her husband from back in the country that she ran away from, and how she came from a rough household, and, you know, he doesn't understand why she left their home, and he's kind of hoping to take her back. And I love the sequence of her when she sort of tries to appease her husband in a way as much as she can, but making it clear that eventually that she's not coming back with him.
Yeah.
And I think she really shows how women have to sort of play along to not get hurt, you know, because we don't know if like he might escalate the situation and or like take her by force if she immediately says, no, I'm not going with you. Like she kind of plays along with it in a way so that she doesn't get hurt, you know, physically or emotionally, but that eventually she has to say what needs to be said. And it's this very, really, really tricky balancing act that I think, just to speak to the writing of the film, which doesn't really have to do with her performance, but it's sort of in tandem. It comments on how women have to deal with men in society, and it's something that hasn't really changed 60 years later, really. This idea of like having to sort of play along and be nice in order to not get hurt. I think that element is something that, to speak to something you were saying, is like, you think you know this film backwards and forwards just from culture and just knowing this film, but there's so much deeper meaning to it that I really resonate with, especially in 2022.
Yep. It's a very specific kind of negotiation that she has to deal with, because she's not only dealing with making her desires be known, she's also dealing with this male ego that is ever present in life. But I think she loves Doc, but this is what she needs now in her life, to be away from that. And how do you break to a person that, sorry, it's not you, it's me. It's difficult. And I would remember at the time, this was the 60s, and I think this story is, set late 50s. I'm not sure, because I watched all of these films with my mom. We would hear stories of some of my grandmothers being married at 16, 15. And yeah, at the time, like closer to that time, like there were women, at least in my country, like their parents don't even will to have them get the education because they're gonna be with a man anyway. And what do they need an education for when they're just going to be inside a house cleaning? So that weight of... First of all, I'm thankful for my mom for giving context from this time. She's young. She's 56. But the context of like, how does a woman negotiate separating her needs from a man at a time where everything is so stacked for her to need a man? Or to be enforced to have that need, because she knows what she wants, or maybe she doesn't, but at the moment she knows she wants to be away from that.
She knows what she doesn't want.
Yeah, she doesn't
Right.
want that.
Right.
But how do you negotiate that when everything else, like you have a man who's like really older and you're divorced and you still have to console him and you've been away from him, and society would probably want you to just get back together.
Yeah.
And to carry all of that in a romantic comedy / drama.
Yeah.
I don't know. I'm starting to see a lot of generosity in Audrey as a performer here.
I mean, there's so many different tones to the film that I think there's a risk that it could just be like tonal whiplash from scene to scene, just like broad comedy and then just like this devastating trauma dramatic sequence. But I mean, just to speak to the lighter aspects of it, right? Because this is like
fun.
Supposed to be like a romantic comedy, and we've mostly been talking about trauma.
This is fun.
Yes. But I think, just to speak to, like, we get into some fun misadventures a little later in, where very reminiscent of Roman Holiday, I would say, where they go to Tiffany's, her and Paul. They go to the library. They go to some like gift shops to try to steal something. There's like a nice sort of playfulness and some immaturity, I would say, even that she really plays into there, which does show that even though she's had to grow up fast because of her childhood, there might still be a little bit of like that child in her too that hasn't quite developed into like a mature adult necessarily. Even though this isn't a huge like acting showcase, like this whole montage of them going to all these different places, I do think it does show like her strength in just being a very natural comedic performer.
Yeah.
Like when she's talking too loudly in the library, you know, or she's like figuring out what she wants to steal, and there's like some fun physical bits there. I think that's really showing the side of Audrey that people fell in love with, and that obviously Paul falls in love with as well, just like that playfulness.
Yeah, I think because the whole world kind of like took the comedy side a lot for Breakfast at Tiffany's, we had to go to the extreme opposite. Like, this is so sad. But yeah, she does a lot of comedy here, different kinds of comedy in terms of dialogue, in terms of physicality, the slapstick part. Yeah, you know, like a few moments ago, she's talking about dealing with that divorced husband that she married at 14, and now she is trying to steal like a little aquarium. Like, that's so silly. And she allows herself to be silly, and it's not that kind of silly. You only get to do it really well when you know you're in it, in the joke, and you know timing. Her face draws a lot. Like that GIF on Twitter, is it GIF or GIF? I forgot. But that when she takes on her shades, and like when there's like a sexy dancer, it speaks to how physical she is.
Oh yeah.
Even when she can go small, she can go big, and the big comedic jokes are really funny. The Timba, she is fun, and it shows range, because to get that kind of opposite ends within one film with different tones, it speaks to her strength as a performer and how the film was able to capitalize on that. Because I'm not sure if maybe we'll discuss that later in one of the questions, but yeah, this she I think she feels so fit in this version of the story. Let's just say that in this version of the story, because Truman Capote might not agree with me.
Yes. Famous hater, Truman Capote. Yes. But like, I think by the end, there are a few moments that are a little over the top, I think, in terms of like her reacting to what happened to her brother, and she's like throwing things around the apartment in this very melodramatic way that I think is maybe a little overplayed, I would argue. There's like obviously the part where she wants to run off with this man from Brazil, but she and Paul are arrested, like their connection with the mob, because that's a whole other subplot here.
Oh, there was a spotlight.
Yeah. I don't want to get bogged down in details there, but they're at the police station, and she has this very kind of performative air about her. Yeah. Like she's like this glamorous criminal. Again, a little too over the top, I would argue, but by the end, when she's in the car, like that final sequence, and Paul is reading this letter from this Brazilian man saying like he wants to break it off with her and everything, you just see her, all she's doing is like changing into different clothes, putting on lipstick, all these like menial tasks, but also is like trying not to break down at the same time. That's a really great showcase for her subtle acting, her internal understanding of this character. That the ending is, I think, really lovely and bittersweet, and captures the tone of this, again, very like all over the place kind of movie that is capturing so many different tones, but ends in a strong place. Yeah,
the film and the performance ends on a high note. That scene when she was in the car, I remember when she was trying to, do her makeup. I think she hears something about the letter that she doesn't like, and she struggles to make it halfway through her lips with the lipstick. It's so good, that detail. I'm sorry, I'm very technical, but this performance, because she has a lot of things like pent up inside of her, that the small details are the manifestations of the bigger things she's dealing with, and I love that she was able to sprinkle in those, because I think I at least have a problem with one of the performances in this lineup about details. But that's not Audrey. My voice is fading out, but I just want to say that ending so good. And also the film captures her performance really well. I mean, the era has that soft focus thing, but I think the soft focus also has on George Pepper, or maybe my eyes were just like soft focusing on him. But
My gosh.
it's maximizing that. Like, you love her.
Oh yeah.
The form of the film is making us love her, and she uses that to make us understand a character that struggles to even articulate. She tries to sell this image of her, but deep inside it's kind of hard. She's a lot of mess, and it's kind of hard to love that mess. But Audrey's charisma and the film capturing said charisma makes it a lot of work.
Yeah, that's really well said. I completely agree. In terms of the film, obviously it has its flaws. The less said about Mickey Rooney, the better.
Oh, yeah.
Because that is a whole mess. But she is the through line that really is the reason to keep watching again and again to see more layers, we did. Shall we move on to our next nominee?
Oh my gosh, let's go.
Okay. Miss Piper Laurie for The Hustler. This is Piper Laurie's first Oscar nomination, but unfortunately it'll be the only time that we can talk about her on this series because her two other nominations are in supporting for Carrie and for Children of a Lesser God, both of which are like decades after this nomination, by the way. I love Piper Laurie. Obviously, Carrie is iconic. She was great on Twin Peaks, and The Hustler was really her big mainstream breakout. She had done work before The Hustler. She was in Louisa with Ronald Reagan. She was in Ain't Misbehavin'. She took a small break to work in New York for a few years, and then she came back here with The Hustler, which is a huge showcase role for her. So The Hustler is about a pool shark named Fast Eddie, played by the great Paul Newman, who goes to play in a match against this renowned legend, Minnesota Fats. He loses in rather humiliating fashion, and that leads him to this bus terminal where he meets Sarah, played by Piper Laurie, who studies at this local college, and she's sort of coping with her own demons, just like, she's addicted to alcohol, she has a limp. It's a lot of things. And the two of them are sort of drawn together because they've both been through a lot of shit, And eventually she finds out about the kind of shady characters that he is surrounding himself with, and she tries to get him away from that life, but he just keeps getting drawn back into it, which sort of exacerbates her own issues and her alcoholism and leads her down a pretty dark path. The film is mostly about Fast Eddie, so it'll be interesting to see if we think, is she in the right category? I don't know. But love to know your thoughts here on The Hustler, which I talked about on Second Thought only a few months ago, so I'm probably not going to repeat myself too much about the film, but what do you think of the film and Piper Laurie in it?
I remembered now what I forgot a while ago.
Okay.
I did listen to the Judgment in Nuremberg episode because that's where you discuss a lot of films from 1961. I think this is, we're going to part ways a bit.
Okay.
First of all, in terms of like actresses in the category, like I just dealt with a few days ago Michelle Williams in The Fabelmans, so we're good. She comes in really late. I clocked in like 38 minutes. So, people who think that's a factor in category placement, there you go. That's hard data. But for me, I accept her. I accept the placement here because once she comes in, she really starts to mean a lot in the story. Still in reference to Fast Eddie, and I don't think she really, well, at least near the end where she has more to deal with George C. Scott, but it's really anchored on her relationship with him. So, purists in this category would say, then she's category and she's supporting, like, okay, fine. In terms of her performance, I appreciate what she's doing in terms of that stoicism. I think it is a manifestation of how she's just dead inside, empty, and I get that. I remember I'm on one of the rabbit holes in Reddit sometimes, and reference to The Handmaid's Tale because, that moment of like feeling that you're lost in the moment, just like a blank stare, is please correct me, like psychology people, about like it being a defense mechanism to steal yourself, to take away from the pain that you're feeling right now, just force yourself to be numb, not feel it. If I'm correct, I think she does that here, which I appreciate as a generous performer because she's consistent on that one. I think my problem is that since the film doesn't really care a lot about her alone, we always see her on that note. So I have started to feel that there is too little dynamics on that. So that is my problem with the film dealing with her. Should have been the heart of the film. That relationship should have been the heart of the film, but it started to feel like a lull. That's my problem with how the film treated her character. In terms of Miss Laurie, I feel sometimes that the stoicism feels too studied or too careful. And again, I have to preface it that I'm not throwing shade or hate in any of these actresses. Like, I know, I see what they're doing. I just like, if it worked for me or not. It's a fascinating, intriguing chemistry she has with Paul Newman because I'm not sure if it's a 100% fit, and yet it kind of is. Kind of like Audrey and Hepburn. Throwing names. So like Lost Souls. But I think her being with Fast Eddie brings her down even more. This is supposed to be, I think, a passion. I don't know how to do this. There's a passionate relationship in it. And yet it's with her character is like almost dead inside, I think. So sometimes I think I'm getting a lot of like mixed signals. Dissociation from trauma, I get it. But is it still dissociation or monotony? Is this passion or abrupt transition without like logical flow of emotion? And also one thing I have to say that the film is very well made. But I don't think it was able to capture her performance that well. She always seen in like this wide shots. And I think for us to see more of her, I'm sorry, very technical, but to see more of what she's doing, because it's so small, what she's doing, you really have to get it on camera. I think what Audrey had in Breakfast at Tiffany's, those close-ups that really show, oh gosh, that small lipstick thing. I'm starting to zoom in on her because like she's doing something, but I couldn't see it. So I think it was an unfortunate marriage of like, I think it's a little bit too minimalistic, and the film is, I'm not sure if it's as interested in her, but please tell me your thoughts, because please tell me, maybe I'm seeing something and maybe my thoughts would change in the middle of our conversation.
Well, that is a very interesting perspective, and that does make me think about just how interested the film really is in her, which I don't think it is all that much, and that a lot of what she's doing is elevating what's on the page, to be honest. I'll just say first off that I'm just a big Piper Laurie fan in general, so I guess I'm biased going into this performance. I just think she just has like this darkness to her, I guess, for lack of a better word, and kind of a fearlessness that I've always sort of found myself drawn to, just knowing her from her later work. And it's really fascinating to see her here in this younger version of herself, but with that same darker energy.
Yep.
And when I say darker, I don't mean that she's like malevolent or anything, like, but there's just like a soulful quality to her that suggests that she's been through some really awful experiences, and they've just really sort of shaped her into this person who isn't the life of the party. She isn't an especially cheerful person, but there is something strangely magnetic about her that I think does draw you in. I think a lot of it is her voice.
Yeah.
While we're talking about technical stuff, which is of that like lower register, and there's like a weightiness to it. And then also it's just, I think, the way she carries herself, where, you know, the story isn't about her. She has a decent amount of screen time, obviously, enough to probably justify her being in lead as a co-lead. She does, I think, have a few scenes of her own. own, away from Paul Newman. But yeah, this is not what I would say is like the story of this young girl. And I think a lot of it is her voice. While we're talking about technical stuff, which is I think the way she carries herself, where, you know, the story isn't about her. She has a decent amount of screen time, obviously, enough to probably justify her being in lead as a co-lead. She does, I think, have a few scenes of her own away from Paul Newman, but yeah, this is not what I would say is like the story of Sarah by any means. But I feel like I get a fully dimensional person from her, and I feel like I understand how life has beaten her down before she even says anything about it. Like there's just something, the heaviness of her is so strong in so many of her scenes, and she's just, I think, able to create more dimensions than what is on the page for her. Like, we see that she doesn't really have much regard for, like, humanity in general, really, especially as the film goes on. She becomes more and more jaded and cynical. But that also, I think, to speak to, like, what you were maybe talking about, a lack of, like, connecting with the character. When she feels things, she feels them very intensely. Like when she starts to fall in love with Eddie, and it sort of bothers her so much that he won't say it back that he also loves her. I'm curious if you feel like that element of it, like it's almost a bipolar quality in a way without really saying it.
I'm trying to look at my notes because I think like she has the most notes from me.
Wow.
No, I think it's a good thing because I'm engaged. Oh, maybe that was a good thing because I was engaging what she was doing, whether or not I was agreeing with everything. I was
That's
engaged.
True. You had a lot to say.
Yeah, and also like, oh gosh, I was so rooting to be, I want to know her, but maybe she didn't want to be known, and maybe that was also a thing that.
Yeah. Exactly.
Maybe the film, maybe it worked, and I just didn't know that it worked. I think in terms of that, I think Fast Eddie threw her off. Because I think before that, she's a person who's seen life, who's experienced life. And her routine of like staying here, drinking alcohol, going home, I feel like she thought she knew how to handle things. So that's why in the beginning when she said to Fast Eddie, "Do you think I'm too hungry?" That is a good like a good defense mechanism. Again, a defense mechanism. Like, oh, so I'm starting to see a fear of attachment, I think. Or maybe of being misconstrued. But when she takes that jump, and he couldn't take that jump, and again, working with her almost like withdrawn quality, but her demand for someone to express, I think a lot of it is internalized. And maybe you just saw it for me in a different way. But also, I just want to say, I would love a story that is in her perspective. Number two, I haven't seen Twin Peaks, so I don't know her dark side. Because my first introduction to Piper Laurie was Children of a Lesser God, and that's not dark at all. But Carrie was dark. But also that scene where Fast Eddie's thumbs were broken. And oh my gosh, I saw it in her face. She wants to help him, but she couldn't. And I don't know. Actually, I think she saw a bit of herself in that this damaged man, and she's coming to me, and he's coming to me, and I want to give him so much, but I'm also like, what do I have to offer? Like, I'm also damaged, and I don't know, that level of just see her crushing facade, and I was like, oh, Piper, oh, Piper. So I think she has those moments where I'm starting to see in her that, oh, yeah, I think I just wanted to connect with her more. I don't know, maybe was my lack of connection with her creation a lack of connection with what she did, or was her character really not a defense mechanism? Like, nope, I'm only connecting with Fast Eddie. So even with Fast Eddie, there is still this barrier, and unfortunately, that was a crushing lack of ROI, I think, in their relationship. Like, I don't think Fast Eddie, maybe he loved her, but not in the same way that she did. And
certainly not. Yeah.
And I think by the end, are we doing spoiler alerts or 1961? Yes. Okay, spoiler alert. No, I'm not going to say it. But when she meets her fate, it's almost like she's already had the fate even before she did something. And maybe I would go back to this performance and like, oop, missed that. But right now, I feel like I want to know her more.
Something you mentioned before about her being maybe feeling studied in a way.
Yeah.
I mean, she's another actress who does come from the method and, very much is that kind of actress. Really just goes intensely. Yes. Really just like burrowed intensely into figuring out who this person was. And I think, if I am being generous, that it is purposeful what she's doing to create a distancing effect for the audience. But that's just me favoring this performance. Maybe I could definitely see how other people could feel like I feel like I don't really get to know Sarah.
Yeah.
Even by the end, like, you sort of understand just from what she's been through, but it doesn't really like fully connect.
Yeah. I'm just going to blame Robert Rosen. And
okay.
Sure. I think the film wants to delve in her internal struggles, wants to, but not really on a deeper level, because it's about Fast Eddie.
Because it's Fast Eddie's story, right?
And I think, quote unquote, small leads work because of structure, which I think here is an intriguing structure, because when I think of, for example, Anthony Hopkins in A Silence of the Lambs, even he has smaller screen time than her, it's more distributed. But hers is like a progression. So it really depends on whether you're in the progression or not with her. Second is importance. I think she is important to this, to Fast Eddie. To the story, yeah, she is. But still second importance. In terms of impact, that, of course, depends on the person. But in terms of occupied space, I love how, my conundrum of the film not going close to her enough. I love how the film even like makes her small. A lot of wide shots, a lot of shots in the corner. So this person who already feels small is even minimized. So in terms of the film, her character works. Right. I think iconography. But in terms of her being someone if I'm gonna watch her as the Best Actress nominee, I want more. Because if this is her really trying to recreate this almost like zoned out, not deep, worse than zoned out character, then maybe her generosity just hit me in a different way. Make no mistake, I'm fascinated by her.
Yes.
And what she did with this performance, whether I loved it or not.
Yeah,
I don't hate her. That's very defensive. No, I don't hate her.
All the Piper Laurie stands are going to be in your mentions now.
Oh my gosh. Oh no.
But I just find, just from doing this show and from watching movies like this, like centering women and watching them from their perspective, even if they're not necessarily the primary lead, does probably give me a more generous read of the performance than if I was to just watch it as a movie, So I think there is that possibility that I'm, sort of just favoring her because I was watching it from her perspective. But at the same time, I do think she does really lift so much of the sort of dead, numb emotion that could just come across as blankness in another actress's hands. And it could just be a really dull performance, I think, just with the material. But she's able to give it sort of this stormy quality to it that I really find myself, it's a kind of an intoxicating performance. That's probably not a great word to use for it, but it's just it really draws you in. I think, obviously there's that scene where eventually it is found out exactly what her past is. It's weird to sort of like think of this plus Breakfast at Tiffany's and like think of how both of them have like these checkered pasts that they don't really talk about. Plus they have this connection with a guy who is like of a similar type to her. The scene where we find out that it's like her father has been just paying her for her life, and all her life, I should say. That's a really interesting sequence where, she also says she has polio, which is why she limps. And she just says she's scared. And I think another actress would make that probably like a big revelatory, melodramatic scene. But she is in keeping with her character and is almost like deadpan when she says, I'm scared. Yeah. Like in a way that is in keeping with like the cynicism, I think, of the character. So there's a lot of choices, I think, that she makes that are extremely intentional. Yeah. And I think there's a reading of this where you might say that it's too intentional, Yeah. But it strikes me the right way, so what can I say?
To Miss Laurie's credit, this is my first time watching the film, so maybe if I had the advantage of it's like zeroing in on her, because I think the issue with watching films for the first time, at least for me, is that you try to cover so much. Like, you want to see her, but you also want to see the context of her. And I just appreciate generous performances, whether they work for me or not. Yeah.
Exactly. Well, by the end, it takes a darker and darker turn, as we know, because he goes off and gets roped into this game, which is like 3-cushion billiards or something. And she interrupts that and is talking about how, like, these men, the people that he's associating with, are perverted and crippled and just, like, morally bankrupt, essentially. I think the way that scene plays out, it's like this rock bottom moment for her, and you really, at least I really feel for her, just because of all the issues she's dealing with. Like, she's someone who is, I think, addicted to alcohol, you know, having to deal with another person who has an addiction to gambling, and it's this really tricky thing where she wants to help him, but she also needs help herself, and she's not getting that help from anyone, including him.
Yeah, I think that was a scene where shows, it's one of those moments where again it just jumps because there's an urgency in that moment. She sees where Fast Eddie could end up, and maybe she's saying those things to him, but maybe she's saying those you know, that thing when you're giving an advice to somebody and then you hear your own advice and like, oh shit, that's for me too. And I think that it's a crushing thing to be able to witness that, because she's trying to help, but she also needs help. And you see that push and pull of like doing something even if you're not sure you can do it. And that is to help him. And at that very crucial moment, she snaps, and it's brutal.
And those are the moments, I think, that feel modern to me compared to some of these other films that do have their dated quality to them. But by the end, it's really a tough conclusion for this character, because she realizes that Eddie is just not gonna give up being a part of this lifestyle and everything. And the George C. Scott character is visiting her in her hotel room and suggests that sort of like Eddie just wants to pay her off to go away, essentially, which is a lie. But she sort of just gives it right back to him. Like, she sees right through this guy who's like the devil incarnate, basically, the George C. Scott character. She knows exactly who this guy is. She knows that he's taking advantage of Eddie. Yeah. But she also just feels powerless to really do much about it. And there's this, and he kisses her, and there's like this implication that they sleep together even. And you're really seeing more of that rock bottom feeling. And she goes to the bathroom mirror, obviously, and writes out what she said earlier, which is perverted, twisted, crippled.
Yeah. She knows men. What men could do, because she's at the other side. You know, the men that have destroyed Fast Eddie, they still treat him with at least some the man-to-man respect. Right. She's seen it, and she's seen the worst. She's at rock bottom. All is lost. So almost like that ending felt inevitable.
Yeah,
and
sadly.
When she is in that bathroom, where there is that choice of that face again, of blank, but you know it's a face of defeat. It's just like, I'm out. Yeah. In this life. Yeah. Again, a very generous choice from her. Yeah. That would click, I think, other modern audiences, if they go back to watch The Hustler, they would really identify with this because of how I think she's depressed. And that portrayal of depression, the more we talk about it, the more I like, am I Sarah? I'm sorry.
It goes to a darker place than what most films of this time would. Definitely. And that's why it was so revolutionary. I think we can certainly criticize some elements of it, as you sort of suggested. Robert Ross's direction isn't quite like the best of its year necessarily, but the way she ends is it's really an emotional watch, I think, because she does, you're right, it is like a defeat for her. And it's she finds the right pitch for it. Like, you know, she never, for me, goes too over the top with making this into some sort of tragic, sort of operatic character.
Yep.
She's just sort of living in the moment. She feels at a distance from life.
Yep.
And this one guy was able to bring her back, at least for a little bit. And then that was taken away from her, basically, or she realizes that he's not going to change, really. And that's when she realizes there's nothing left.
I think it's even a bigger tragedy when you feel like there's a chance of getting back to life.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I'm sad at this point.
Yeah.
Happy thoughts.
It's a tough watch. What can I say? But I do think she has the right, just like a gravity, I think, for the role, for how she functions within the story. I think the performance works.
Yep.
Well, let's move on to our next nominee, which is Geraldine Page for Summer and Smoke. Geraldine Page is someone you'll be hearing a lot about on this show because she got 8 Oscar nominations in total. Of course, we're only covering half of them because half were in lead, half were in supporting. But she was a major force at the Oscars for multiple decades.
Kind of like Glenn, right?
Yeah, exactly like Glenn.
Oh, I'm sorry. I had that eureka moment.
It's true. I know. She's a leading lady and she's a supporting star. But obviously it finally culminates in her big win in 1985 for The Trip to Bountiful, winning over the heartbreaking loss of Whoopi Goldberg, as you mentioned earlier. But going all the way back to the beginning of her career, she also was someone who studied with Strasberg. She studied the method. She studied with Uta Hagen. She was in theater productions, including Summer and Smoke. And she made her film debut in a film called Hondo in 1953 with John Wayne. And that got her first nomination in supporting. She is by far the best part of that film. If anyone has seen it, she is the best part of it, trust me. After that nomination, she was blacklisted from Hollywood during the McCarthy era because of her association with Uta Hagen. So she wasn't really able to find work in film for 8 years until this. So it's a big break in between Hondo and Summer and Smoke here. But yeah, a big leading role, a role that she played before on the stage. She won a Drama Desk Award for it even. But let's talk about it. Summer and Smoke. It's yet another Tennessee Williams adaptation that we're talking about here. And it's about an unmarried woman named Alma, played by Geraldine Page, living in the South. What a stretch for Tennessee Williams. And she lives with her parents. She takes care of her mother, who had like a breakdown in the past. And so she's had to grow up early. And ever since she was a little girl, she had a crush on a boy named John, who grew up to be a doctor, played by Lawrence Harvey. And the film is basically about them sort of reconnecting as adults and getting into a very tumultuous relationship. He goes off to be with other women, which causes her to become sad and to take certain actions, which I'm sure we'll get into. I'm curious for you what your relationship is with Geraldine Page here.
My first time with her acting was in The Trip to Bountiful. Her Oscar win.
One of her last performances.
Yeah. And then Interiors. And then this one. I think this is just my third Geraldine Page. She is an actress who occupies space. And I mean it in a good way.
Okay.
Yeah. I think it's also like, I have very minimal training in theater, so oops. But in terms of like knowing her space, I think she's really good at that. And I think with what I've seen from her, Trip to Bountiful and Interiors, the filmmakers she's worked with know how to capture that, her relationship with space. And in this one, with Summer and Smoke, I think the theatricality is part of the character building. Like, I remembered Maggie Smith in the prime of Miss Jean Brodie. Like, ooh, that kind of like first took me like, all right, Maggie, this is like an all-time best actress winner, right? What are we doing? When I first saw her like a few months ago, and then halfway through the film, like, oh, her performance consists of a performance of that character.
Exactly.
And that is her way to either cope or survive this world, or maybe that's what society wants her to do. I see a lot of that here. fur. I think sometimes there are moments here where it's either the style has stagnation, it's not having much dynamics, or suddenly boom, too much dynamics.
Yeah.
And I think this could have been pulled back a bit. I think she knows her character really well. My problem is her strategy of conveying that. I understood because she had to grow up fast. But she's also still with her mother. So she had to both grow up fast and still a child in a way. So there is this setting up of like conflict of like, when you're at this age, and of course you're feeling things already, like, of course you're having sexual thoughts, sexual feelings, but everyone still expects you to be a child because literally she is the daughter of blank who needs her to be blank, but to be a child. She has described herself as walled in. Johnny described him as a frigid surface, but underneath the surface you have a lot of excitement. Problem here is, I think it's the inverse of Miss Laurie. With Miss Laurie, I was trying to see through this opaque exterior, which is deliberate. With this one, whoa, Jerry, whoa, it's too much.
Yeah.
I think her body language works, but the facial expressions is a very hit or miss. Same with her vocal registers. But it is a performance.
You certainly can't take that away from her. It is a performance. Yes. I like Geraldine Page in general. I feel like I still haven't even seen enough of her to get a full perspective on whether I love her per se. I'd say it's more of a general respect just for her ability to sort of just, burrow into these characters and really be kind of fearless with being vulnerable and the emotion she's able to express, which is something that this film really requires. I'm not in love with the material here, to be honest. To speak to Tennessee Williams, I've just been watching a lot of him on this show, Streetcar Named Desire, Cat on a Hot Tin Roof, Baby Doll. The formula is starting to wear thin for me. Yeah. The character she's playing is very obvious Tennessee Williams, like Blanche Dubois knockoff in a way, which through no fault of her own, I think just makes the performance feel a little been there, done that for me. Yep. She definitely has the dramatic weight to pull it off. You can tell that she's from a theater background. She studied the method. All of that is here. I just wish the material was better. I wish the material suited her more. She gives it her all, I think.
Oh, yeah.
And I think she's one of the better elements of the movie, which I don't particularly like, but she can only do so much, I think, when the story and the character feel like Tennessee Williams doing a ripoff of himself, essentially, and not really getting at the heart of what makes his writing so compelling and juicy. Maybe it's also the direction, too, that's just so flat and so uninspired. I mean, you spoke about how, like, Piper Laurie wasn't always framed in a way that was, like, connecting with you well. That's how I feel with this. There's, like, very little visual flair to this movie. It's incredibly stagey, and it just feels like you're kind of watching a play, in a sense, which is fine in some stories. In this story, where it's supposed to be so much about the depth of emotion and all the sort of changing emotions within Alma, I've felt a distance here for me. There's a few mentions in the film of how, like, she has that performative quality to her, like the pure sort of Christian values kind of gentility, and that does bear out in her performance, where all of that sort of proper behavior that she's showing is very pronounced, but sometimes it just becomes so forced and that it's awkward, quite frankly, and not in a way that I think is intended per se. So I kind of watch this film not really knowing if I even like this performance. She definitely gave it a lot of effort. And there's a lot of things you can point to and say that was a good scene individually, but I still kind of feel like the writing and her performance is so messy and all over the place that I don't get a full grasp of like who is Alma at the end of the day.
This speaks to my relationship. My response to this film is that I had more response with her relationship with her mother than her with Johnny.
Yeah.
Because I think with the mother and the daughter, the performativity makes a lot of sense. That how strained or stilted she is, it's a relic of time past, an antiquated tradition that she has to uphold to maintain some sense of normalcy, because this Johnny guy is going to throw that normalcy off. But when she's with Johnny, I don't know about you, but I think sexual repression is a topic in film that you have to discuss with a lot of nonverbal cues.
Yes.
Because it is repression. You don't get to say everything.
Right.
And with this one, I feel like it's not even like her repression to him. Like, it's like repression in general, being unbound. And the confusion that she is showing is a manifestation, hopefully, of that push and pull between, gosh, I want to have sex, or like, oh no, I'm a child. And the societal expectations about women, especially women in that like place in society, where everyone hears another. So for those aspects, I appreciate aspects of this performance. The hesitation, the fear, the lack of spontaneity. Like, she has to unlearn those in the process of the film. I just think, putting on my filmmaking hat, that's why I'm quiet. But I'm trying to think of a way to capture this performance. Then say, pull Geraldine back, get closer. Because, gosh, I mean, sexual repression, this is my jam, baby. And this would have been like such a wonderful exploration of sexual repression from that time, when sexual repression is much more repressed. I don't know. Yeah. I think on paper it's so juicy, but I think the form of the material, the writing and the filmmaking really are at odds. And she here almost feels like compensating with so much external drama, and it comes off as compensation.
You can see the effort, I think, unfortunately. Yeah. Well, I mean, when you look at the whole film, like, there's so many like individual moments where she's having like outbursts or just this emotional volatility that is very, to bring it back to Tennessee Williams, that is very much like a Tennessee Williams type of thing with Blanche Dubois and Elizabeth Taylor's character, Maggie the Cat, in Cat on a Hot Tin Roof. There's always like that frustration that's been pent up after so much, and just finally being able to externalize it. I think it's just like there's so many of those moments that it just kind of almost negates the emotional high points that I'm supposed to feel. And it just sort of becomes like almost a histrionic kind of performance. I know that word is kind of loaded, but I just feel like it's pitched at such a high level. You know, I mean, it's like she's just not really being reined in, I suppose, is what I'm trying to say. Yeah. And she is trying to wring so much emotion out of the material and really trying to like go directly to every member of the audience, including the people in the back. Yeah. So that it feels like a very theatrical performance for me.
And also the thing that I think of when I was watching this performance was, I love a gutsy performance. I love a performance that takes risks, even if they don't work. So props to Jerry. But I think it's about moderation.
That's the thing.
It's about being dynamic to be able to create a trajectory for her performance. And if it's all high, even from the beginning, it's all high already, then you get a flat line.
Right. Exactly.
And this performance, this character is about not being a flat line.
Yeah. I mean, there are moments, I think, where she does shine, which is in the more subtle moments. Yeah. Like when there's the moment after they go to the casino and it's like basically a horror show and she has to get out of there. Yeah. And they go on like a stroll where she sort of talks about how she's been unlucky in love and whatnot, and he kisses her and they find this like beautiful gazebo where they kiss some more, and there's like this talk of like the body and the soul and everything. Like that's the whole theme of the film. And it's clear that she wants that deeper spiritual connection with someone, but for him it sort of just is like he just wants to ravish her, and she gets scared. And to her credit, I do think like she plays the brittleness of her character really well, so that you understand why she would react in that way, even though this was supposed to be like her dream guy who she's loved since childhood. When he is communicating a certain way, she has her guards up.
There are those moments, but on the flip side, you get I think a phone call where a twitch, an eyebrow raises, the other one goes down, like pak pak pak. I was like, Jerry, like, I don't know. Sometimes to hold back is to say more.
Yes.
I think I would recall that scene from Ruth Negga in Loving, where she has a phone call and be like, the journey is in the inability to express or react to everything. Yeah. But here, it kind of blunts that or dampens whatever is. It's like she's not even making us guess anymore. Like, she wants deep connection. And we know what she wants because she just, I don't know, so transparent, but in her body, in her face. And like, I would say though that if the hysteria is part of the character, then the film did not establish it well.
That's my problem. By the end, I think, you know, after all the tumultuousness of him going off with other women, like Rita Moreno is here, by the way, as another woman. But I think after the tumultuousness of that and this part where she like calls his father about like this marriage because he got married to another woman and she's upset, and it causes this big eruption, and he goes to confront her because his father was actually shot in the confrontation and is like on his deathbed. After all of that, after all of the highs of that, she sinks into like a depression essentially, and she just stops teaching her singing lessons that she's been teaching. That part of it reminds me of what she would do, I think, to greater effect in Interiors, which is a character that is very withdrawn from the world. But of course she perks up again when, Nellie comes around and is like delivering a Christmas card to her, and it's from her and John. They are married. Alma sort of takes it as an opportunity to visit him again and makes these very overt advances on him. She does deliver a monologue here that is quite affecting, I think, when she talks about like receiving a ring from herself, her former self, you know, and how it's like, it's important to, I actually wrote this down, it's important to make sure her hands aren't empty, something to that effect, and like to forget about pride whenever it stands between you and something you must have. Like, it's very overwritten and sort of corny dialogue, this monologue, but she does at least have a sincerity, I think, to her that works for the character individually. Like, again, it's like these individual scenes work. It's just not really connecting as an overall arc for me. It's a very old-fashioned style of performance, I think the most old-fashioned of these nominees. And I do think this style kind of starts to go away as the 60s go on, but this is like still lingering on with like the 50s style of acting, I think. I would just say that it's only up from here for her.
If her end point is a trip to Bountiful, then it's an upward journey. Yeah,
I would say so. So more on her next week, because she's nominated again for Sweet Bird of Youth. All right, let's get to our final losing nominee here, Natalie Wood in Splendor in the Grass. So Natalie Wood, I would consider one of the bigger names of her era, and she lived a very fascinating life. She was a child star, famously in Miracle on 34th Street, which we talked about way back in the day on the Best Picture series. She did a lot of family films, and then she's actually also shown up in some of these Best Actress films that I've talked about, like The Blue Veil she shows up in, The Star, and then she actually gets her first Oscar nomination in supporting. This is another one for Rebel Without a Cause. I think probably it paved the way for this performance in Splendor in the Grass. She did have a few setbacks in her career after Rebel Without a Cause, but Splendor in the Grass really just sort of cast her in a new light for general audiences. Splendor in the Grass, it's about a high schooler named Deanie, played by Natalie Wood, who's in a relationship with Bud, played by Warren Beatty in his film debut. He's this kind of preppy, I'd say like upper middle class, and the two of them want to take their relationship to the next step and have sex. But because of their environment, because it's the 1920s, they feel like they shouldn't do it because society says no. And a lot of it just has to do with the influence of their parents and just the kind of sexual repression of their environment. And yeah, eventually Bud does decide to cool things down with her, which causes her to act out in a rather unpredictable way, which escalates to her needing to be put in a mental institution. So, what are your thoughts on Natalie Wood as an actress and her performance here in Splendor in the Grass?
So, I've only seen Miss Wood in Rebel Without a Cause more than 12 years ago now. And
wow, okay.
yeah, like I'm not really into the rewatching thing.
Yeah.
But also West Side Story, I think almost like 12 years ago as well. So I have no established relationship. It's more like a reconnection. A reconnection of something that didn't even begin. So with Natalie Wood and Splendor in the Grass, I think this is where we're going to splinter again.
Oh, okay. We'll see.
Oh.
Do you know my thoughts already on this performance?
I heard it on the Judgment of Nuremberg episode, but maybe it changed. I don't know.
I literally don't remember a single thing I said about that performance, so I could have changed completely.
Yep.
But go for it.
All right. So Splendor in the Grass is a fascinating capsule of how to deal with that youthful energy and sex. Well, sexual repression, journey towards sexual liberation. But again, like this lineup is very much a part of its time. This is still under the Hays Code. Well, it's losing its power, but Mr. Hays is still powerful. So it feels like this film is caught in its desire to deal with sexual frankness, but is also unable to do so with as much frankness necessary to really make its point as sharp as it could. But you know,
that's fair.
We deal with what we have, and I think the fairest thing is to just go with the text that we have here. Because these people in these films keep referring to each other with like Miss Blank. I just keep Miss Wood, Miss Page, Jerry.
Jerry.
In this film, like what's surprising to me is how this is a good performance. That sexual energy, the sexual repression that she has. I think when the first time she goes home after making out with Warren Beatty, she goes to bed and she does this little motion, like this hunger for sex. Like she almost wants to hump the pillow or the bed. And the body language suggests enough.
Yeah.
I think that is my point with this performance. I think it does enough. But I think in terms of coming of age, the genre of coming of age, acting coming of age, that's very difficult to capture because what do we have here? We have characters that are not yet fully matured, but they have heightened emotions and they feel like small breakups or small things mean the world. Yeah. So you have to toe that line between like, you have to understand that to be able to portray that. And it also has a journey. And in coming of age, I think nuances are also so important. I mean, sexual repression, but coming of age in general. I think Miss Wood has highlights here that show, oh, she's got that important part, like a crucial turning point in her character. But sometimes I look at scenes where, you know, in between those peaks, and I'm looking, is this youthful innocence or this is the performance being green? I feel like sometimes it's broad to the point of sometimes it makes me feel mixed signals, at least in the first half. But in the second half, when she gets these big moments, she gets them. Generally, she gets them. You know, if I'm going to be like breaking down units of a scene, like how she says this line and this syllable, like sometimes you have those like, oh, little slip here and there. But generally, they work. And sometimes she has electric moments of like when she starts to see, maybe she didn't even see where she's gonna go, but that depression, that breakdown, that it's imploding already, that desire, that inability to handle the whirlwind of emotions that one has, unfortunately, when they're young. But oh my gosh, but if I could, implicate myself in this conversation, like imagine me in like in the don't imagine. I would imagine like in like late 2000s, early 2010s, and I would think back of sexual repression. It feels so intense already, and I already feel like I have some level of safety because I see some sex in media, so there's an outlet for that. This character doesn't have that, so there is an intensity to it, but at the same time, you're also guarded by the societal expectations to not express it. So it's like everything's heightened. The control over your body language, and because there's so much control, it's just building up that heat inside, the body heat.
The hormones.
Yeah. But, later in the film, that moments of grace at the beginning where I thought, maybe this is a bit too broad. I felt later in the second part of the performance that it's becoming to be deconstructed. To see like, oh, that was, again, maybe she was not conscious of it, but a performance for the society she's living in. Because, she has to be virginal. She has to like, have you been spoiled? And I'm like,
right,
girl, she's been Warren Beatty. So both her and Warren Beatty suggest sexual intensity. I mean, it's not.
Certainly.
But the connection, that's where I feel a bit tentative. Character-wise, I think they are effective, but in terms of as a couple, sometimes like, okay. But ultimately, I think, no, you go ahead.
No, it's a very complicated movie and performance.
It is.
To talk about and to place within the context of when it came out and what what era it's reflecting as well. There's a lot to contextualize with it, so you're good. I just want to say first off that I do think Natalie Wood was such a gifted performer, especially when she was used in the right way, and that wasn't always the case necessarily. But when she's playing characters like this, I think they do suit her strengths. There's obviously an innocence that we've talked about, how that she has to exude, that does, for me at least, make you root for her. And then there's also that rebelliousness there, which is sometimes underneath that innocence. Sometimes it's more overt. She gets to explore both really in this performance and really create an arc with the character. And I really think, to go back to the Rebel Without a Cause comparison, this is like a confirmation of the potential that she showed in that film. Yeah. But I think at least sort of finding the right tone to not go fully over the top with it. I mean, this is such like this character, I think, is a gift of a part for a young actress. And I don't think a lot of her contemporaries, the younger actresses that were there at the time, maybe would have been able to get the tone of it right without going into theatricality and maybe even verging on camp territory, because there's a lot of high intensity scenes here that we will discuss. But I think with Natalie, I'm sure Elia Kazan was a contributing factor to it too. I do think there is a sensitivity to it and a willingness to really go to some dark, uncomfortable places that makes her feel very real and very compelling to watch. I wonder how audiences reacted to this film in 1961, which is, again, at this point where a lot of change was in the air and about to go down, where the revolutions, sexual revolution, everything, confronting like the whole system and our beliefs and everything. Because it's like, even though this film is taking place in the 20s, I would say it feels very contemporary to 1961.
Yeah, I think there is the advantage of, being set at this time, but being able to tell this story at this time. I mean, for sure, if this is done now, then there would be more of, another reconfiguration, because now we get to, if they want to do sex, they can show sex, but what would it mean for these characters that are stuck in the 20s. I mean, these people, like, they have to hide for sex. They have to hide sex. Not so much, I think. But in terms of her, the placement of this character here in the story, I think it would have had such a huge impact, because the film feels traditional or old school, and yet you see it pushing as much as it could of what they could be told in the Hays Code, like that movement on where, like, they were making out inside the house, and then Deanie starts to, like, literally go down, not the sexy go down, literally go down, like, whoosh, so it's really reaching those, it's hitting the limits, but I'm glad to see a film willing to hit the limits, because then you can only go forward in its depiction of that. Right. I mean, after, when you go to the 70s, like, woohoo. Yeah. But with this one, I think it has the film understands repression, sexual repression. I think when you get to see Warren Beatty and Natalie Wood making out a lot, and you also have the Barbara Loden character, there is an understanding and a genuine interest. But at the same time, I'm starting to think of, was it interest but not immersed in that work? Kind of like, Euphoria, so immersed. So I think the film has a lot of conflicting things for me. But I think it's a good thing that makes you think, because, I don't believe in, like, imposing modern standards on everything from the past, because that's just gonna work. You have to work through the context, and I'm glad that in your series you're going chronologically, because then you're working with the context. Yeah. So I don't know what I was going for, but I think here the film is trapped between the shackles of censorship and its earnest desire to tell it, and in some ways, that being stuck in that middle, and you can only do so much in representing that. For me, that also applies to Wood's performance. Yeah. There are moments here that feel raw, like reciting that poem, the titular Splendor in the Grass. Yes. And you see that, I don't know how to describe it, you can see in her face, it's slow, her soul is being crushed. And like, oh, that's a lot of showy unshowiness. Like, you have to get those details shown, but they're not, of course, they're trying to fight it. How do you show something that the character was not wanting to show? Yeah. And I think really from that reciting the poem, from then on, she's kind of in this very fragile emotional state that she stays in for a lot of the film. Like, she sort of explodes at her mother when they talk about Bud, which becomes this very volatile scene, but one that I think she really does nail. There's something very striking to me in how we are seeing this person who was doing her best to just be the nice girl, quote unquote, just being like the average, nice, doing whatever is asked of you, don't want to get in trouble, just getting straight A's, like that good person, being pushed to the limit and sort of expressing herself in this very wild, uninhibited way. I'm talking about, like, in the bathtub sequence. Oh, yeah. Which is, like, really unrestrained work from her, where it's like she was asked to just, like, go to 11 with that scene. Yeah. But I think it weirdly works. I mean, it's obviously extremely over the top and her, like, outbursts of everything, but it makes sense when you're watching the film, as she's just been, like, constantly bombarded by these messages, these mixed messages about sex, and just feeling so repressed and pent up, I guess, in a way, that she finally just is able to explode. I'd say she earns that explosion, both character-wise and as a performance. I think the film and the performance earned that moment too. Like, that was a moment that the film has set up really well, and she delivers in that one, because it's so difficult when you suddenly have this jump. It's almost like a leap of faith that you have to take with a performance, like, this is going to work or not, because if it doesn't work, then, oh shoot, I just destroyed the first hour of character building with something so drastic. But yet here, it makes sense. I was just wondering, though, I remember when to talk about Clint Eastwood in The Bridges of Madison County when Meryl Streep was talking like, why didn't you film when you were crying? Why didn't you give yourself a close up? And Clint Eastwood was like, it doesn't work for the character, so I'm not gonna show him crying. So like, sometimes you want to give a performance so much, but then it would go in contrast to the benefit of the film. I'm wondering here though, because sometimes she has those, even in the bathtub, like, oh mother, I'm spoiled. Like she would then go down to the bathtub, or like when she was facing her mother. Some of these crucial scenes we're seeing the back of her head instead of her face. I'm wondering if that was helpful or counterintuitive, because it's already an explosion. But, I think the film is as confrontative as it could get with sex so far at the time.
Yeah, as much as I can. Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, I think it does center you in the feelings that she's feeling by giving you that. I mean, after that point, she tries to get back together with Bud at the dance, and she sort of is insisting to him that, no, I'm not a nice girl, but he rejects her, and the boy she went to the dance with drives her up to the waterfall and tries to assault her.
Yeah.
Which she revolts against, and she is just in a very bad state of mind at that point, and she decides she might just end her life there at the waterfall, which, again, it's such a huge moment. But she really, I think, captures the kind of feelings you have as a teenager growing up, and how everything feels so big.
Yeah.
Everything is the end of the world. All of your emotions are heightened. Your hormones are exploding.
Yeah.
And these kinds of like heartbreak moments feel like the end of the world.
Yep. And the erratic behavior, like you said, is true to the character and true to the age. So yeah, but there's just a danger. I'm not saying that she did this. No. I think there's just a danger of like doing erratic behavior and not doing it well, but just like your acting choices don't make sense anymore because it's erratic. It's erratic anyway. No, it still has to make sense.
I see.
Yeah, she does. Yeah. She worked it.
And, after that whole experience, she's in a kind of catatonic state, and she's like sent to an institution. Eventually, finally, she is visited by her parents after like 6 months, and they're, of course, extra nice to her. Especially her mother, who she's had this tumultuous relationship with. And I think her mother is harboring some guilt, feeling like she is the reason that her daughter is where she is. But we see just from Natalie Wood and her body language, she is not thrilled with having them around, which I think she plays the sort of coldness of that. And then, unfortunately, the film is so balanced with like the Bud storyline and everything that we completely do not see the next 2.5 years of this girl's life in the institution. That is, we only get like a handful of scenes, and suddenly we're like 3 years later. I wish we could have seen maybe a little more of that. I think it sort of just is trying to show how people change and sort of just like how she's healed, quote unquote.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think she says, that she's going to marry one of the other patients there. And there's like this more of a calmness in her demeanor that shows that she's probably mellowed out by this point. I love the scene where her mother very directly asks her if she feels like her parents were to blame for all of this. And she just hugs her mother, and she's just like, it's all right. Like, it's kind of like all is forgiven. Like, she doesn't want her mother to be in pain, even though the reality is, yeah, your mom kind of did contribute to a big part of how she became the way she was.
Yeah, there is a maturity in the second half of the film, which at least shows that life has happened to her. And yeah, the film got more interested in Bud. I mean, I was interested in Bud, but not in service of the film. And that ending is something that I was pleased to see, because there's a stillness in it that, when I was saying a while ago, like sometimes I feel like she's broad in the earlier scenes, here the stillness are not empty. They are part of
Yeah.
a maturity
They're
that
filled with
comes with
meaning.
age, that you don't have to
Mhm.
say everything. And the loose ends can be loose ends. Them being not closed is the closure to those loose
Exactly.
ends.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I do think that there is intention in her being broad in the beginning and now obviously mellowing out by the end. I think that is very intentional. And to be honest, you know, teenagers can be pretty broad sometimes. So like I'm not too critical of that part of her performance, but yeah, by the end she has a maturity. They have this really beautiful exchange. First of all, like her and her father have this really nice exchange where her father tells her where Bud is because she's been looking for Bud. Really nice little connection moment there. And then the final exchange of her and Bud in the end, they've both matured so much. He is now married with a child. So they've both grown up quickly, I think. But I think they both give off exactly the right bittersweet energy of being like, yes, you were my first love and I'm always going to treasure you for that, but we're also different people now. And we can forge our own paths, and we've kind of moved on, even though there's like part of me that's still gonna be like thinking about you sometimes. It's like you never forget your first love kind of thing.
I know the feeling.
Let us get to our big winner, Sophia Loren, for Two Women. First time nominee, first time winner, making history here as the first actress to win an Oscar for an entirely non-English language performance. Yes. I don't really count Anna Magnani for the Rose Tattoo because she also speaks in English through a lot of that film. I also don't count Jane Wyman because, you know, she uses sign language, which is technically not spoken English, but it's still mostly an English-speaking production. This is just straight up a film from Italy. Like, there's no American English aspect to this performance at all. So, yes, let's talk about her. Sophia Loren, an Italian actress. She started in the 50s, gradually crossed over as an international star in Hollywood with things like Houseboat, Pride and the Passion, working with big, you know, Hollywood names, Cary Grant, Frank Sinatra. So it wasn't like she was an unknown from like just like plucked out of obscurity. Wow, this great performance, you know, type of thing. She was decently well known at this time. But then Two Women comes along, and to bring it back to Anna Magnani, actually, Anna Magnani was originally supposed to play this role, and Sophia was going to play her daughter. But Anna actually dropped out of the picture, and Sophia fought to play against type here, playing the mother role, which is a really interesting story, even though she was only 25 at the time, which really diverged, I think, from the novel that it was based on. But yeah, she made it happen, and good for her. The daughter was recast, obviously, to be played by a teenager like we see in the film. So it tells the story of Cesira, an Italian woman living in Rome during World War II. She's a shopkeeper, and her city is bombed. And so she and her daughter flee to her hometown. I believe it's her hometown, where she meets this intellectual named Michele, who she bonds with. And her daughter also kind of bonds with him too. And then he's captured by German soldiers. And so her and her daughter decide to eventually go back to Rome, and along the way they are forced to deal with something rather unpleasant, which we'll talk about. So I'm sure you have a lot to say about Sophia Loren and her being the first foreign language performance to win this category, I think, of any category for acting. So yeah, tell me your thoughts on the great Sophia Loren here.
I love her. One thing I would say, though, is that it's so interesting to hear, because going back to my connection with my mom, I watched my first encounter with her was 9, and that doesn't count because she's a very small role.
Yeah.
So my introduction with her was, I think, this before I
Good
watched
place
The
to
Life
start.
Ahead, because I want to get that, oh, she's been back on the big screen feeling.
Yeah.
And then, because on my podcast, I worked back. A Special Day, Sunflower, Yesterday, Today, and Tomorrow, A Marriage Italian Style. And I saw a star who is so fucking beautiful. Like, she makes me straight. But
wow.
in those films that I've seen from her, she never relied on her beauty. She always transforms to her characters. Mm-hmm. I'm so aggressive right now. My body language is so heated.
You feel passionate, like a Sophia Loren kind of performance.
Yeah. Well, Kevin, grazie mille for inviting me in this episode. But it's so interesting because my mom, when she was younger, she was watching Sophia Loren films on TV when they were playing. Mm-hmm. And she was seeing the Hollywood projects that she's done, where she was a sexy, sometimes in romantic comedies. And she was surprised to see, like, oh, she's a great actress. I didn't know. I was like, and I knew her as a great actress. So it's an interesting entry point from wherever you're coming from. Are you going back? Or are you seeing her career chronologically? And where to women places? Mm-hmm. So I love her. She's one of the best ever. She deserves those 2 Oscars, one competitive, one honorary. Mm-hmm. But with 2 women, it's so fascinating because, you know, she replaced Ana Magnani. Yep. And I've seen people say that she was a bit too young for the role. But I actually think, going back to my conversation a while ago about women at the time, and at least in my country, where they were getting married at 12, 13, 14, 15 and having kids, you see here Shazira, who is probably a bit young, but is thrown into motherhood. And she does a pretty good job in it. I mean, who am I to qualify motherhood if it's good or not? Anyway, but she just tries her damn best. And that urgency to deliver as a mother and as a woman within wartime misogyny or misogyny in general is an energy that you cannot fake it. And I never felt her to be fake in this profile. I mean, I'm not the person to go, oh, it's not natural, because, you know, I appreciate stylized performances as well. But this performance is close to raw. This is no bullshit that fits perfectly into the neo-realist adjacent filmmaking, because, you know, this is kind of far from the genuine neo-realism.
Yeah.
She's just so present in this, and that's not the best adjective they have, but that presentness, that no bullshit, is so electric when you watch it, because I forget that she's one of the most beautiful people that has ever graced this earth. Here, she's a single mother who protects her child. You know, she has a way with money because she's smart. She knows that people can be cruel, and she uses her wits to deal with the BS of life, and that transcends through her, maybe it's the Italian energy anyway, but how fierce she is in delivering her lines, because it's almost like she's fighting for her daughter and herself every day. Like, she's not faking that, she is fighting. And the body language is just there. And to have this film where this is so character driven, it puts a lot of stock on her to maintain a continuum, because with the film not being plot driven, really, it's very character driven, it invests on her ability to be able to tell a story. And her character is whole. She telegraphs so much, but not too much. And by the end, before we reach that horrifying incident, she has already crafted this well-rounded character that just pushes to the heights once she gets, you know, those big moments. But even in the small moments, she fits into a lot of, like, these non-professional actors. Kind of reminds me of Frances McDormand in Nomadland.
Yes. Well, I have to just say that I completely second everything that you said. I mean, I've seen Two Women once before, which I think is just when I was watching all the Best Actress winners. I remember really liking her performance, but not really in a way that I could articulate why before this rewatch. Just remember liking her screen presence. But watching it again, yeah, I think she's totally undeniable here. I think she is a force of nature, totally is commanding the screen from the first minute. You see her passion, her fierce love for her daughter and wanting to protect her. You see some of her sensuality even at times, the way she navigates conversations with men and sort of trying to get out of certain situations, like using her street smarts. Yep. Yeah, she just has so much magnetism on screen. but it never feels like glamorized in a
yeah.
way of like, oh, here's this beautiful Hollywood star de-glamming and playing like this lower class woman. It feels very real. And I'm sure with someone as striking as Sophia Loren, there would be a temptation to romanticize a lot of this, you know, for as dark and as awful as the story is and what these characters go through. You know, it could feel very much like this big Italian melodrama and just go way over the top. But it stays grounded, you know, and it's because of her performance where she just feels so rooted in reality. I think like so many mothers feel, which is this need to protect their child however they can. She may be frustrated with her child at times, but there's always a fierceness there too of wanting to care for her no matter what and make sure she's all right, and she will do what she has to do. And it's just really powerful to see that, and especially at her age at the time, only 25, and still pulling off that like very maternal quality.
Yep.
And like this wise beyond her years kind of quality too. I just think she's fantastic here. And it does remind me of Anna Magnani, what I've talked about with her performances on this show, where she just feels like a real person. She doesn't feel like a construction or like an archetype, like she's rehearsed it all before.
Yep.
And she knows all the beats and like when to hit them and everything. It's just spontaneous, which is what was so great, obviously, about the Italian neorealism. This being a late addition to that, obviously, but it's so raw and grounded, especially compared to these other films and performances that we've talked about, that it is almost like apples and oranges here in a way of she's so unique in what she's able to do here compared to the other four.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, I'm bursting with my emotions here. But you know, to see that visceral presence on the screen, and I know I'm like 3, 4, 5 films into her career. I just want to see more. I was like, how does this woman who's so stunning get to fit in a wide shot, and like you're even trying to scramble here, like where is she? It's because she's so present, and luckily also the film helps in that it positions her as one of the people, and yet also putting this story that even before the horrific incident happens, this film is about men seeing women. She doesn't matter, she's just a woman. Like sex for a favor. Every advantage is on her side here. So when she goes big, it's big with groundwork, but it's not monotone, because like she would be angry with a soldier, and yet she would be having laughter in a lunch, and yet she would be eager to open a letter, I think, and then she would be worried for her daughter, and then the spaces that are happening in between, like. And these like grounded, realistic performances, I think I don't know how to do them, because like the nature of filmmaking is so artificial, right? It's like you dress up, makeup, you know, you're Sophia Loren, you're like, you know, let's dirty your hair because, you know, you're too pretty, and yet action. But when she's just going, I always try to remind myself, like, okay, this is about Best Actress, okay? She's a Best Actress nominated, she's a winner. But yeah, it's a fury that it's that rage that I'm gonna kill. I'm gonna kill for my child energy, that I think I see hints of those in my mother and in the mothers that I know. Of course, they're not close to killing people, but that you don't try me energy, she's got it.
Again, it's wild to me that she was so young when she made this, but she feels so mature at the same time. You see just in her line delivery and her body language that she is tough, but she also has that feminine quality to her, where she is classically beautiful. So she's having to deal with these men. And you see, I think, all of that in her first interaction with the guy who she's entrusting with her shop once they go off away from Rome, how tense that sort of negotiation is, and how you see it all playing out on her face. Sort of like doing the sort of mental gymnastics to try to figure out exactly how to get him to protect the shop while also trying to like keep her distance. And she realizes, I think, that the only way for her to get him to do this is to just sort of give in to his advances a little bit. She makes these very strategic choices that reflect her street smarts, this character, and she just inhabits all of them like she is a real person.
That moment of like when it dawns on you that you're in an unpleasant situation, and like, how am I gonna deal with this? How am I gonna? Oh gosh, it's so good. But then it's already a foreshadowing.
Yeah.
But then she's already saying no, and the guy's like, trash. But yeah,
Right.
it's a brilliant foreshadowing because it shows her that in a moment like that, she's just gonna pull up and push through, and that is magnified to the most devastating of degrees in that moment in the church.
Yes. I mean, what's interesting is that I think when you think about this film, at least when I think about it, I do think about that third act
Yep.
moment more so than really like the middle hour or so where they are in her hometown,
Yep.
which I think she also plays decently well. And there's like a carefree, just like easy breezy quality to her as she's hanging out with these locals.
Yep.
So like it's not a film that's all about misery and trauma
Yep.
and darkness. We see how she's able to lift people's spirits, you know, like when they're all sort of laughing together and she's like making fun of Mussolini.
Yeah.
Or when she's like entertaining the English troops, the two guys who show up. She's very like active and present, and it's not all just like misery porn, you know.
Yeah.
It's not like, oh my god, what a horrible situation this woman has to go through, and that's like the whole film for an hour and 40 minutes. Like she's able to at least show the different shadings of this character and how she would be a very happy, thriving woman if she was not forced in this situation.
Yep. The third act won't work if the film and her did not lay out the groundwork in the first two halves, because you see,
Right.
like, I'm wondering. I don't know how, of course, they wrote this, but sometimes I feel like I think when I was watching, I felt like, did they write this film with the third act and it went backwards, or was
Yeah.
it a natural progression? Because it felt like the former, and that's fine. I do that in my film sometimes. That you have to set it up, and
Yeah.
there is a strong setup that when that happens, there is a visceral energy to it. And I think when people talk about Two Women, it's like the film where she was raped or they were
Yeah.
gang raped, and it's actually just one scene, but because the film has established that language of like, this is what she's dealing with, it almost felt inevitable. And then
Yeah.
even in that scene, I mean, I'm not gonna go into details because I might be triggering, but it even looks away and not shows the whole ordeal, but it's in her face, in her body language, that immediate reaction to trauma, herself, her own trauma, seeing her daughter's trauma, and needing to lift her up, and that damage. How do you enact damage? And they had it both ways. I mean, the daughter was almost catatonic, and she was trying to be present because that's what her daughter needed. There's a selflessness in the character that I don't know if you can even fake it. When that scene where she was confronted by the soldiers, like she's asking for help, and the soldiers like, is she crazy? And just reminded me of like how many times were women told they were crazy when they were saying that something wrong happened to them, especially with sexual assault. And she, oh gosh, there's no false note. It's just, oh, ooh. I don't know how to say it anymore, but yeah, her performance makes me cry.
Absolutely. And to talk about that moment, I won't talk about, like you said, we're not going to dig into everything there, but really brutal to watch, and definitely remembering how shocking this would have been in 1961, I think, for like a Hollywood audience where the Hays Code was in place. Like, we're not used to seeing scenes like that, but it's really horrifying, and it's quick, but you do feel the terror of just from how she plays it, and especially in the aftermath and her sort of dead, numb expressions, and just the pain of her knowing that it also happened to her daughter. who is, she's shell-shocked by it. And this beautiful note of her just brushing her hair, I found to be really heartbreaking, and because she's just doing what she can to care for her daughter and is realizing that neither of them will really be the same after that, but especially seeing it happen to her daughter, who earlier in the film she talked about her daughter as a saint, and she just holds her in this high regard. And knowing that this happened to her, she's still just trying to be strong for her daughter, but she went through this too, and she's like restraining tears. It's such an effective scene. And, the close-up where they're in the car with that guy who picks them up with the tears in her eyes just from everything they've been through. It's just like how...
Are you okay?
I'm speechless. And I also feel like, to bring it to the Oscar discussion, how do you not vote for this performance? It's undeniable for me.
Yeah. It's fury driven by love. That's
Yes.
hard. That's hard to go up against with. That energy is gonna kill.
Yeah. So let's talk about her Oscar win here. She did not attend the ceremony. I will just note.
How dare she?
She has a great quote actually, where she said, "I decided I could not bear the ordeal of sitting in plain view of millions of viewers while my fate was being judged. If I lost, I might faint for disappointment. If I won, I would also very likely faint with joy. I decided it would be better to faint at home."
Good for her.
Which is fair. Yeah, I respect it.
Yeah.
But in terms of precursor stuff, Sophia Loren won the New York Film Critics Award. She had won at the Cannes Film Festival already. She won the BAFTA for Best Foreign Actress, so she had some hardware going into this. And Audrey Hepburn was a Golden Globe nominee, but she didn't win anything. Piper Laurie was a BAFTA nominee, New York Film Critics nominee, didn't win anything. What else? We had Geraldine Page, who had support of some critics. She won National Board of Review. She won a Golden Globe for drama, and she also won at the Venice Film Festival. Natalie Wood, she was in gossip columns. She was very talked about a lot because she was linked with Warren Beatty. Plus, she was also, touted by some critics who said she should be a leading contender for this award. She was nominated at BAFTA, nominated at Golden Globes. So that was kind of the lay of the land. Sophia Loren won precursors. Geraldine Page won precursors. Everyone else had something but didn't win anything. So, yes, why do we think that Sophia Loren was able to make history here and be our big winner? And also for her being the only nominee from two women.
I just want to acknowledge first, I just realized that our Best Actress and Best Supporting Actress winners, Sophia Loren and Rita Moreno, both were sexually assaulted in with their characters. I don't know how to make of that fact.
Yeah.
But of course, there is a story of Jonathan Levin, I think the producer, who bought the film and really marketed this hard, in terms of setting up screenings in every city where there's an Academy member. But I think in terms of campaigning, you can only go so far. You can only just make people watch the film. They cannot make it like it. So if they like a film, there's that. But also mentioning how this was different in the realm of the nominees, because Geraldine Page and Piper Laurie were method, and then Audrey Hepburn is more of the old school in a good way, and then Natalie Wood, I think, is in the crossroads because she's been a young actor, right? And then she's making here, so she's almost in the crossroads. Sophia Loren is this entirely different thing, and that doesn't always win, but she has the benefit of having a career where she has an image of being this bombshell, this sexy vixen in cinema and comedies, or I think she has minimal drama. I think she only had the Black Orchid, where she won the Venice for Best Actress, but that was in 1958, and I don't think it was very successful. Here it feels like a disruption in her career, she could do that. And I think the Academy and the Oscars have a lot of those moments where she could do that moments. That's why there's a narrative to her. I would think of probably, I don't know, based on what I saw in We Can Rewind. For example, Anne Bancroft for the longest time was this not really being given these big roles until, boom, The Miracle Worker. just that disruption within the race and the disruption within her career,
Mm-hmm.
it gives fire to the campaign that is already eager, but you can only sustain a fire for a campaign for so long.
Yes. I think all of that is true. I think her public image being just as the sex symbol in Hollywood is something that she actively was not as interested in. So that's why she took on two women. So yes, that's very much like a strong narrative that continues to this day. I think just in general, the Academy is becoming more comfortable with international presence at the Oscars. So like, you know, we had Melina Mercouri the year before for Never on Sunday, which is a hybrid English and Greek performance, but it's still a Greek film. You know, Anna Magnani had already won before. She was an Italian star doing a Hollywood production, but still, she wasn't like a homegrown star like we always used to give to Best Actress to just whoever was popular in Hollywood, born and raised in Hollywood type of stuff. The performance itself, I mean, it's kind of naive sometimes to talk about maybe it was just because she was the best. But in when you look at the competition, I think the depths that she's able to go to with this performance, I think are so much greater than her competition and land so much more effectively than the other four, that it was just kind of undeniable. Plus, she did have all of that precursor support that we talked about. She was a presence ever since the Cannes Film Festival, winning there. So, yeah, I just think she had the right combination of factors, from the precursors to the fact that she was already established somewhat at that point, but doing something different. And the performance is kind of undeniable when you watch it.
Yeah, the situation was conducive for the win. And, you know, I mean, sometimes there have been performers who won just because of the circumstances.
Yeah.
But here, how could you deny it? I mean, I'm not sure if it was an undeniable win, like in terms of at the time were people really predicting her, but just things make sense. It makes sense in the end. But I'm so happy this happened, because this kind of moments don't just happen in itself. Like, for example, how Parasite won Best Picture. That didn't just happen in 2019. The groundwork has been laid out for that to happen.
Exactly.
Wins almost always have groundwork or narrative to go with. Or even when someone comes out of nowhere, that's their narrative that came out of nowhere.
It's kind of encapsulated with what she actually said after winning the Oscar, which, like I said, she wasn't there, but she did make her comments after she won. She said, "I started as a sex symbol, but it was a symbol of mother love that I won an Oscar, and that gives me extra satisfaction."
Good for her.
Which is
really,
yeah, which is true. And I love that she was active in wanting to chart her own career path, because Hollywood very much would have just kept typecasting her as that beautiful sex symbol type and probably never really thought to give her a role like two women.
Yeah. And
especially at that point.
Yeah. And sex symbols as treated by Hollywood unfortunately don't have the longevity. Like, you're hot for 20 to 40, but when you're 40, so
yeah,
she was
exactly.
she had, I think she had the advantage of being able to work in her home country.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Where people hopefully saw her more than the other sexy person. I'm glad that she had that agency and that ability to establish that, because, oh my gosh, I mean, we've had a lot of these actresses who, like, years later were like, we didn't know she was so good. Like, yeah, I didn't know she was so good because you weren't giving her anything to prove her, like, to show her skills.
Exactly.
Yeah, and this was the 60s.
Right.
Yeah.
Let's get to some Twitter questions, shall we?
Okay.
People had some things to say. All right, here we go. KFleet208 said, how/why do you think Sophia Loren was able to win in a non-English language film role, especially being the only nomination for the film? Obviously, we just went over that. I also think the role is just so sympathetic. like way more than anyone else in this category. You know, it made it easy to root for her and want to vote for her. Sometimes that is the case, especially in Best Actress as opposed to Best Actor.
Oh, the likable character.
Yes, likable. Yes, exactly. Grig said, you've now covered both Italian Best Actress winners. Is there any Italian actress / Italian language performance you would add to this lineup? This lineup meaning nominated at any point, not this specific lineup. I mean, Giulietta Messina, of course, for Knights of Cabiria, and La Strada is the go-to answer. Do you have others you might think of?
In terms of Italian, I haven't seen a lot of work from Monica Vitti, so I'm unfortunate. But, you know, when talking about 1975, which you will discuss down the road of like being one of the quote-unquote weaker years, like there was Mariangela Melato for Swept Away, directed by Linevert Müller, who was fantastic in that film. So, yeah, those are my options so far. But, yeah.
Yes.
And Giulietta Messina, of course.
Yeah. Lady Gaga in House of Gucci.
I'm Italian.
Yes. Moving on. Leela said, if you have already seen other Sophia Loren movies besides Two Women, which is your favorite one, and which of her performances would you call her personal best? I admittedly haven't seen a lot of Sophia Loren movies. I've seen this. I believe I've seen Marriage Italian Style. I mean, I think she was really impactful in The Life Ahead, you know, her big comeback from a few years ago. I still wish she gained a little more traction for that. But I think of what I've seen, Two Women is her best.
I also think Two Women is her best, but I would just give a shout out to... I just contradicted myself. There's a different kind of greatness that she achieves in A Special Day with Marciano Mastroianni. Marciano Mastroianni, I think, was nominated, but she wasn't. But that was, 1977, where all of the nominees, the Best Actress nominees, were in Best Picture nominees, a rarity. Yeah, she was great in Marriage Italian Style. I so rooted for her in The Life Ahead, and it's so weird to say that that was a few years ago because it feels like they're still in 2020. It's already 2023. But yeah, I think Two Women, but in a different phase of her career, A Special Day.
Carrie Christmas said, is Two Women the prequel to Three Women? And if so, is there a one woman to start the trilogy? Very good question. Yes, it's Susan fun. Hayward in Smash Up, the Story of a Woman.
Oh, yeah. Oh.
She was the woman.
Oh, no. She and Piper Laurie together, drinking.
Let's move on to some questions about Audrey. James R. Burns said, Audrey was absolutely lovely and charming, but it's my understanding Holly Golightly was a small-town hooker in the big city. Not what I saw in Tiffany's. It was written with Marilyn Monroe in mind. Should Audrey even have been nominated since she didn't play the character correctly? I think she adapted the character to suit her strengths. Even if Truman Capote might have went in a different direction with the character, yes, she should have been nominated. And her version of the character is played effectively.
Also, was Marilyn a choice for casting during the novella process or in the script process?
I think both.
Both. Well,
yeah.
The film mutated a lot of times. In this case, I think she fits into the version of Holly Golightly that this version has.
Right.
Because in my understanding, the novella was much darker. Mm-hmm. And then it mutated and then mutated and then mutated until it became a romantic comedy. Right. With this version, I couldn't imagine anyone else. But given the Marilyn Monroe's being an idea for casting, and since I've seen her in The Misfits also from this year, I would have wanted a dark Breakfast at Tiffany's starring Marilyn. But, yeah, I
would have loved to see that version.
We do what we got to do.
Yeah. Both Chels, our friend Chels, and our friend Andrew Carden asked the same question, which is, which of the Audrey performances of 1961 do you prefer, Breakfast at Tiffany's or The Children's Hour?
Hi, Chels. Hi, Andrew. Breakfast at Tiffany's.
Yes. I think in terms of depth of performance, I think there's a lot to be mined from The Children's Hour that I think is really good. I think she's great in that. Mm-hmm. But it's one of those things for me where you never forget your first. And for me, that's always Breakfast at Tiffany's. So I would say she's nominated for the right performance, even though I would have taken either one.
Yeah. I think, the thing with the children's R is that it's a more obviously dramatic one. So, that gives it more kind of like stock in terms of Oscars. But like we've discussed, like the character of Holly is no easy trip.
No,
And I think in the children's hour, if I'm going to pick one, it's going to be Shirley MacLaine. But,
I was going to say that too.
with Best Actress, you could do both in one film.
Why not both?
Why not Academy? You can do
Yes.
that. Two Best
Exactly.
Actress nominees from one film, but I prefer her
What a
work here.
concept.
Yeah.
Yes. Some Geraldine Page questions from Baby Clyde. Is this Jerry's worst nominated performance? She's like 15 years too old for the part. I mean, possibly. I haven't seen all of them yet. We'll probably discuss it on the 1985 episode when we get there. When we're done with Geraldine Page, I'll finally have
Rank
my...
the 8.
Yes, rank the 8. But of what I've seen of her nominations, which is most of them, I guess, this would probably be my least favorite.
Mm-hmm.
Probably you would agree.
Yeah, from the 3, yes.
Yeah.
To counterpoint, I think her being a bit too old, quote unquote, too old for the part, actually adds some layers to the spinsterhood of her character.
That's fair.
It makes the thirst real for like the sexual repression. I mean, I just put it more better, but yeah, it adds a different dimension. Same way that Sophia Loren is not necessarily the perfect fit for Shazira, but it adds another layer
Right.
to the character.
Exactly. Matt Stillman said, "What even is Summer and Smoke? I've seen the other 4 performances, but haven't even heard of this one. Also, if Geraldine Page won for this, does Whoopi later win for The Color Purple?" Well, to answer the first one, we talked about it, so now you know what Summer and Smoke is.
Yeah.
But for whether Whoopi would have won later on, I do think Geraldine Page's overdue narrative was really powerful for that win. So I think... yeah, Whoopi would have had a much stronger chance if Geraldine Page had already won. So I will tentatively say yes right now, but I will answer that again on the 1985 episode.
Yeah, I think, well, first of all, Summer and Smoke is a film about teenagers smoking weed during summer. But in terms of that,
course.
I agree that the narrative of Geraldine Page's Oscar season 85 was overdue. Now, whether if she had won, for example, in 61 or earlier, no, let's go with 61. If she won for 61, would there be like, it's been a while since she's won her first, I think she's set for a second, because that happens as well. And to go up against Whoopi in The Color Purple, and Geraldine is, far, I think 2 decades, right? So there's that, it's been a while since she's won, and then she is quote unquote near the end of her career. Whoopi is like this big breakout, is probably gonna have an opportunity probably in the future, but at the same time, that's like since how they responded to The Color Purple, well, nominations wise they were generous, but how they connected to it was another story. And the Oscars history with people of color in this category, so it's complicated because then you could muster up several narratives. Is she gonna get a second, or is Whoopi gonna be, because we've just seen Renee get her second and Frances get her third. And this year looks like it's between Cate Blanchett getting her third or Michelle Yeoh getting her first, or Danielle Deadwyler in her like breakout lead for first. Michelle Williams, who's been multiple nominations. So I think you have to be in the year, and we could go into multiple multiverses for this story, but it's going to be unending.
Well said. Yes. Natalie Wood question here from Christoph. Why did the Academy nominate Natalie Wood for Splendor in the Grass over West Side Story? I think because it was stronger for Natalie Wood dramatically. I think that performance in West Side Story kind of gets lost in the shuffle a little bit. Also, she doesn't even sing, so I don't know if people held that against her. Marnie Nixon, of course, steps in and sings for her there. Yeah, I think this was the much meatier role for her.
I have 2 questions, and it's not necessarily for you, but number 1, did the contemporary reviews of West Side Story even cite her as one of the strong points of that film? Number 2, did they know that Marnie Nixon, was it public knowledge already at the time that Marnie Nixon was...
I think so.
Yeah, so those are the factors. Like, if you're going to be in a big ensemble, like, hopefully you're going to be one of the standouts, especially if you're a lead, because, but of course you could say like, well, was George Takei's also like very much highlighted, but I think it's easier to get swept away with nominations in supporting it's hard to be swept away in lead, because then you have to be the one carrying the film, which I think I would just counter myself, because I think Piper Laurie's advantage was she was in the Best Picture nominee with 9 nominations,
Right.
compared to like Shirley MacLaine in The Children's Hour, or something else, or like Leslie Caron and Fanny. But I know your feelings about it, Fanny. So.
Well, to get to some miscellaneous questions here, we only have a few more here. Sammy Flowers said, are there any other non-English language roles you think deserve to win before Loren, or even ones that would have been worthy of a nomination? Again, we cited Julieta Messina for Knights of Cabiria. Obviously, honestly, like, I can go back all the way to Renee Jean Falconetti for The Passion of Joan of Arc. Even though that's a silent film, it's technically a French film, so I kind of count that as foreign language-ish.
I would admit I prepared for this question because, I think it would be having a podcast about it and prepared. I did for 1948 for another podcast, so I watched like 97 films for that year. So I have like my own ballot there. And this actress named Viviane Romance, who had The Queen's Necklace and Panic. She's my personal pick for Panic. I think it's a Criterion. It's a great film. Best actor Lamberto Maggiorani and Enzo Staiola for Bicycle Thieves. Toshiro Mifune and Machiko Kyo for Rashomon. Ingrid Bergman for Europa 51. I haven't seen Stromboli. Takeshi Shimura for Ikiru, which was eligible in 1960, even though it was in 53, I think. And Emmanuel Riva for Hiroshima Mon Amour.
Yes. And how fun would it have been for her to get the Amour nomination all of those years later?
Yeah.
Speaking of like a long break in between, that would have been great.
Yeah.
Mr. E Guy in LA says, is the snub of Deborah Kerr's performance in The Innocents the most egregious in Best Actress history? Probably not the most, but ranks as pretty high for me in terms of someone who would have probably contended for the win for me, for my own personal ballot if she was here. I love that performance. I love how Deborah Kerr was so willing to just take a risk like that and just do a straight up horror film. I know some people hate the phrase because it's so overused, but it feels like an early example of like elevated horror in a way.
Loaded term.
Yes, but she's so great. I love that performance.
I watched that for this, and I agree. It's because she was known for the lady characters.
Yeah, refined. Yeah.
It's utilizing that, and what if the lady was terrorized?
Exactly.
It's fantastic performance from her. I haven't seen her in this way. And but in terms of egregious, like, are we talking objectively, because horror have a harder time getting in. So maybe it wasn't the most obvious snub, but in terms of quality, there's a lot. But if I think with what I've seen from Deborah Kerr, my favorite performances from hers are when she's not nominated.
Yes, that is the case for most people. Yeah. Yep. Miles McHale said, in terms of omissions, neither of the lead actresses from La Dolce Vita, or possibly Shirley MacLaine for The Children's Hour, or Vivian Leigh for Roman Spring and Mrs. Stone. Yeah, there were a wealth of performances this year. To highlight, again, Shirley MacLaine in The Children's Hour, that is a very personal performance, and is one for me that I really wish was here, that we could talk about it more. And I encourage listeners to seek out The Children's Hour for people who haven't already. Very powerful film about homophobia in just the early 60s with the Hays Code going away. It's another one where it's really trying to skirt around certain things and go right to the edge without fully offending.
Yeah, I saw that also for this. I love her here. I think this is like an egregious snub, if there was one, and for this year, because she was just nominated the previous year for the Best Picture winner. She got a Golden Globe drama. And the film had 5 nominations, including Faye Bainter. So the acting branch saw this.
Shout out to former Best Actress nominee Faye Bainter.
Hi, Faye, wherever you are. May you rest in peace. So that is, The Children's Hour is, I would not say, I think it just came close. I think when people say of like snubs, I think sometimes it's just a matter of few votes, because everything was pointing towards that direction. Like, 5 nominations already for a film, like, even got like art direction and cinematography. So there is love for this film. I don't think they were necessarily avoiding it because you got Faye Bainter nominated. So they were willing to embrace this. I think it's just a matter of a few votes. And
Yep.
I also just saw Vivian Lee a while ago, also with Warren Beatty. There you go. And in terms of the Dolce Vita, I don't see them as leads per se. But at the same time, I could not really credit my watch of that because I watched it like last year, and I had an alcohol poisoning while I was watching it, like literal,
God.
not the fun one, like the rubbing alcohol poisoning. Someone put alcohol in my food, and like I ate it, and I was projectile vomiting.
Jesus.
So
oh my God.
I was not in a good place to watch the Dolce Vita. But
wow.
yeah, but for me, my personal, like, hopefully I was more factored in what I've seen, like Marilyn Monroe and the Misfits. Of course, Deborah Carr. Who was this? Oh, I really adored Miyoshio making Flower Drum Song. That would be a cute nomination. Cute.
Follow up to her supporting win.
Yeah. And then there was a great bunch of films this year. I think
could make a whole alternate ballot really with that. Yeah.
Oh, also Ruby Dee and Claudia McNeil for A Raisin in the Sun. We saw that this morning. Really great film, and I think it's been restored recently. It's a really great one.
Well, the final question we have today is from Cinema Sex Kitten, who said 1961 saw the release of Disney's 101 Dalmatians. Which of these actresses would have been best in a live-action adaptation for the role of Cruella? Sophia Loren.
Ooh.
I can just see the furs on her.
Yeah. I would admit, and maybe this would get me expelled from this podcast, that I haven't seen the 1990 the Glenn Close version or the animated version. I'm sorry.
It's been great.
But knowing the clips that I've seen, like with what I know of her character and I've seen her actions, baby Jerry, this is your moment to go big. This is it. Let's go for
Jerry.
it. Yeah,
wow.
Geraldine Page as Cruella de Vil. She would have eaten it up. But
yes.
I also saw Sophia Loren. Yeah, give credit. I can't see the others though.
Yeah, I can't really picture it. What does Audrey Hepburn's version of Cruella de Vil look like? I don't even know. Yeah. I think I'm gonna do a quick Google of this.
Go ahead.
Because it's funny that you mentioned Geraldine Page with this. Ooh. Yes, because she did do the voice of a villain in a Disney movie, The Rescuers.
Yeah.
Yeah, she played Madame Medusa.
I'm too predictable at my choices.
Look at that. She already had the Disney connection, so that would have been interesting to have her slotted into that role. Anyway, let's move on to our final segment, where we will discuss who we think was the runner-up of this Best Actress race. Juan Carlos Ojano, make your decision. Who was the runner-up? This could be any of them, so I'm curious to see what you say.
Natalie Wood. I really toyed between her and Geraldine Page, but given, of course, I have to credit my friend Claudia, who I asked him, like, who was the runner-up in Inside Oscar? But at the same time, I don't know, like, a lot of times, like, the Academy would vote for the future.
Yes, very much so, especially in this category.
Yeah, and Natalie Wood here represents, like, I know an actress who's been in the industry treating a subject matter that is probably going to be discussed more frankly in the next few years, and is a star. Like, she is in West Side Story, the almost sweeper of this year.
Right.
So it feels like something that they would go for with Geraldine. I think Geraldine was always seen as a character actress that they respected, but like, even Sophia Loren here, like, Sophia Loren was young and also could represent like a future in Hollywood. So this was still in the 50s, 60s. I would feel Natalie, and of course I forgot the name of that woman who wrote an article after the Oscars who said that Natalie Wood was robbed. I think it's either I'm not sure if it's Hedda Hopper or Luella Parsons. Some of those women throwing shit in Hollywood, but it feels Natalie Wood.
Yes, I also think the runner-up was Natalie Wood. I think she was hot at the time. She had a narrative of her own, of coming into her own as a adult-ish actress, late teens, adult, young adult, whatever. And they love an ingenue. Yeah. What can I say? So yeah, I think even if she didn't win any precursor awards, I think, yeah, she represented part of the future for them. But obviously Sophia Loren was undeniable, so she got in the way of that narrative. So final question for you, who would you have voted for from this lineup? This is probably obvious.
Oh my gosh, who? I mean, for me, like my pick is Sophia Loren, obviously, but I also love Audrey Hepburn and Breakfast at Tiffany's.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and the three others were no sleepers.
I would also have voted for Sophia Loren, so we are totally linked on this episode. Yeah, I think she is far and away the best performance in this lineup, and is again doing different things from the other four, but is still creating such a memorable, haunting, raw character.
Yeah,
that I love her.
I feel
she earned it.
Yeah, I feel like, if I was there at the time, I would even like personally campaign for her. And, like,
yes.
Like there's subtitles. I'm voting for her. Like subtitles. Let's go. And
there you go.
A vote for her is a vote for world cinema, something like that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I really love her in this.
Well, thank you so much for joining me for this long and winding episode. I truly appreciate it. You had some great thoughts, and I think we came to some good conclusions here, so thank you.
Yeah, thank you for having me in this year. Yeah, I love being able to discuss actors. I think this is the first time I've gone on the record with my thoughts on actresses, and I just love them.
Well, it won't be your last.
Yes, like this is gonna be an annual thing. I'm marking it.
Yeah.
All right. But thank you so much for this opportunity. I really love being able to discuss acting at huge depth, because I love acting. I love actresses, and I love being able to talk to people about the things that I love. And thank you for giving me the platform.
Thank you. Where can people find more of you on the internet?
You can find me at home. I'm just here. I'm unemployed.
You're just hanging out.
Yeah. But you can find me on Twitter, if there's still Twitter, at Carlos Ojano. My podcast, The One Inch Barrier, is available in all podcast platforms. And my YouTube channel is there. I have a YouTube channel, Juan Carlos Ojano, where I review stuff and say shit and try to make some fights, but everyone's just so supportive. There's no fights. But yeah, just Twitter, podcast, YouTube.
Yes, absolutely. Recommend all three for Carlos. All right. Well, thank you all so much for listening. You can find me on Twitter at Kevin_Jacobson, the podcast at Oscar Runner Up on Twitter, Instagram at And the Runner Up Is. Rate, review, and subscribe if you haven't already. And if you liked what you heard and want to hear more, go to patreon.com/And the Runner Up Is, where you can hear a whole bunch of bonus episodes. Next week, we'll be delving into the very iconic 1962 Best Actress lineup, where the nominees were Anne Bancroft in The Miracle Worker, Bette Davis in Whatever Happened to Baby Jane, Katharine Hepburn in Long Day's Journey into Night, Geraldine Page in Sweet Bird of Youth, and Lee Remick in Days of Wine and Roses, with the winner being Anne Bancroft. So looking forward to that episode. That's what to watch before next week. Yeah, thanks again, Carlos.
Thank you, and happy next few days of our lives. I don't know.
Yes.
I'm so happy. Thank you.
And with that, I will bid you all adieu.